The conference room fell silent as Caleb Turner slid a single document across the polished table. Victor Kane's confident smirk vanished. For 2 weeks, the powerful developer had crushed small businesses without consequence, but he'd made one fatal mistake. He'd underestimated the quiet accountant sitting across from him. What Kane didn't know was that Caleb had spent 14 years hunting financial criminals, and he'd just found proof that would either save Lena's cafe or destroy everything they'd both fought to protect. The next 60 seconds would decide which. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're ready to see how a single father and a coffee roaster took down a corporate giant, hit that like button and stay until the end. The cab's taillights disappeared around the corner of Maple Grove Avenue, and Caleb Turner stood motionless in his driveway, watching the only life he'd known for 12 years vanish into the Seattle twilight. The suitcase Vanessa had packed that morning sat heavy in his memory, efficient, methodical, like she'd been planning this for months. Maybe she had been. The July heat pressed against his dress shirt, still crisp from the morning despite the long day at Morrison and Webb. His tie hung loose around his collar, and his briefcase sat abandoned on the front steps where he'd dropped it the moment he'd seen her standing there with that expression, the one that said she'd already left emotionally long before the cab arrived. "Caleb?" The voice cut through the silence, gentle but unmistakably present. He turned to find Lena Morales standing at the property line between their houses, her dark hair pulled back in the practical ponytail she always wore after closing the cafe. She wasn't crying. She wasn't offering hollow sympathy. She was just there, solid and real, holding 2 paper cups from Morales Roasters. "I saw the cab," Lena said simply, crossing onto his lawn. "Figured you could use some coffee." Caleb took the offered cup, his hands operating on autopilot, while his mind struggled to process the enormity of what had just happened. The coffee was exactly how he liked it, black, no sugar, the medium roast Lena reserved for her most particular customers. "She didn't even say goodbye to Emma," Caleb heard himself say. His 9-year-old daughter was at soccer practice, blissfully unaware that she'd come home to a fundamentally different family. Just left a note on the kitchen counter, said she couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't be the person we needed her to be. Lena sipped her own coffee, giving him space to speak or stay silent, whichever he needed. It was one of the things he'd always valued about their friendship. She never filled silence with meaningless words. "I should feel something," Caleb continued, staring at the cup in his hands. "Anger, devastation, something, but I just feel empty, like I'm watching this happen to someone else." "A shock," Lena said quietly. "It'll hit later. Right now your brain is protecting you." "You sound like you've been through this." "Different circumstances, same abandonment." Lena's expression didn't change, but Caleb knew her well enough to catch the old pain beneath the words. Her ex-husband had left 6 years ago, walking away from both their marriage and the cafe they'd built together. She'd bought him out with money she didn't have and turned Morales Roasters into something better than it had ever been with him. They stood together as the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the manicured suburban lawns. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. A car passed. The world continued spinning like nothing catastrophic had just occurred. "Emma's practice ends in 20 minutes, Caleb said, checking his watch with the same automatic precision he brought to everything. 14 years as a forensic accountant had trained him to compartmentalize, to function through crisis. "I need to pick her up. Need to figure out what to tell her." "Tell her the truth," Lena said. "Kids know when you're lying, and they fill in the gaps with things worse than reality. The truth is her mother abandoned her. The truth is her mother made a choice, and that choice says everything about Vanessa and nothing about Emma." Lena's voice carried a quiet steel that reminded Caleb why she'd survived when so many small businesses failed. "You tell Emma she's loved. You tell her that her world just got smaller but stronger. And you tell her that sometimes people leave, but the people who matter stay." Caleb looked at his friend, really looked at her for the first time since the cab had pulled away. Lena was 34, 2 years younger than him, with the kind of face that didn't draw attention in a crowd, but revealed depth the longer you knew her. She wore her usual work clothes, jeans, a Morales Roasters t-shirt, and the leather bracelet her daughter Sophia had made her 3 years ago. "Thank you," he said, "for being here, for not making this weird." We've been friends for 5 years, Caleb. I'm not going anywhere just because your wife did. Something about the way she said it, simple, factual, unshakable, cut through the numbness. Caleb felt the first crack in his composure, a hairline fracture that threatened to split wide open. I need to go, he managed. Emma, go get your daughter, Lena said, already turning back toward her house. Bring her over after dinner if she needs distraction. Sophia's building a blanket fort in the living room. Kids are welcome. Hell, you're welcome too if you need to not be alone in that house tonight. Caleb watched her walk away. This woman who'd become his closest friend through hundreds of shared coffee breaks and conversations that ranged from their daughter's school projects to the ethical implications of his latest fraud case. She disappeared into her own house, a mirror image of his own, part of the cookie-cutter development they'd both moved into years ago, and he was alone again with the silence. The drive to Riverside Park took 12 minutes. Caleb used every second to construct the conversation he'd need to have with Emma. He ran through variations, testing phrases, anticipating her questions. It was the same methodical approach he used when preparing to testify in court, breaking down complex financial crimes into narratives a jury could understand. But Emma wasn't a jury, and this wasn't a case he could solve with evidence and logic. She spotted him from across the field, her face lighting up the way it always did when he arrived. His daughter was all angles and energy, with Vanessa's blonde hair and his own serious gray eyes. She waved, shouted something to her teammates, and came running with her soccer bag bouncing against her hip. Dad, did you see my goal? Coach Martinez said it was textbook. I totally faked out their defender, and Emma stopped mid-sentence, her smile faltering. What's wrong? Caleb had spent 14 years maintaining a poker face through hostile depositions and tense negotiations. His daughter saw through it in 3 seconds. Let's sit in the car, Kik, he said. We need to talk about something. Emma's expression shifted from excitement to carefully controlled fear. She was too young to hide it well, but old enough to know that "we need to talk" never preceded good news. She followed him to the SUV in silence, climbed into the passenger seat, and waited. Caleb started the engine but didn't shift into drive. He gripped the steering wheel, searching for the right words in the systematic way he approached every problem. Facts first, emotions later, clear communication. Your mom left this afternoon, he said. She's not coming back. The silence that followed felt like falling. Emma stared at him, her face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally a terrible understanding that aged her 5 years in 5 seconds. Where did she go? Emma's voice came out small. I don't know. She didn't say. Is it because of me? Did I do something wrong? No. Caleb turned to face his daughter fully, needing her to hear this with absolute clarity. This has nothing to do with you. Your mom made a choice about her own life, and that choice was wrong and selfish and entirely about her own problems. You are perfect exactly as you are. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back with the same stubborn determination she showed on the soccer field. Are you okay? The question caught him off guard. His 9-year-old daughter, processing her own abandonment, was checking on him. I will be, Caleb said honestly. We both will be. It's going to be hard for a while, but we're going to get through this together. Just us? Just us. Well, us and Lena and Sophia. They're not going anywhere. Something in Emma's expression eased slightly at that. She'd spent countless afternoons at Morales Roasters doing homework while Caleb worked on his laptop, building blanket forts with Sophia in the cafe's back room, learning to identify coffee beans by smell from Lena's patient instruction. Can we go there now? Emma asked. I don't want to go home yet. Caleb understood completely. The house would feel different now, contaminated by absence and betrayal. Every room would echo with the life they'd thought they were living. Yeah, he said, shifting into drive. We can do that. Morales Roasters occupied a brick building on the corner of Harbor Avenue and Vine Street, nestled in the waterfront district where Seattle's industrial past met its boutique present. The cafe had been there for 8 years, surviving the area's gentrification by being exactly what the neighborhood needed: authentic, unpretentious, and consistently excellent. Caleb had discovered it 5 years ago while working on a case nearby, drawn in by the smell of fresh roasted beans and the promise of coffee that wasn't burned or oversweetened. He'd stayed for the atmosphere. exposed brick, mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and kept coming back for Lena's quiet competence and her talent for knowing when customers needed conversation and when they needed to be left alone. They'd become friends gradually, the way adults do when their lives overlap in comfortable ways. Their daughters were the same age and went to the same school. They were both single parents navigating the particular challenges of raising kids without partners. They shared a preference for directness over small talk and an appreciation for people who kept their promises. Caleb had never thought about it as anything more than friendship. He'd been married, Lena had been rebuilding after her divorce, and the relationship worked precisely because neither of them needed it to be complicated. Now, parking in front of the cafe as the evening settled over the waterfront, Caleb wondered if Lena had known what Vanessa was planning, if she'd seen the signs that he'd been too focused on work to notice. The cafe was closed for the day, but lights glowed from the back room. Caleb led Emma to the side entrance, the one Lena had given him a key to years ago when he'd started using the cafe as a secondary office after hours. They found Lena and Sophia in the main room, sitting at one of the large community tables with an elaborate blanket fort under construction. Sophia looked up from her engineering project. She approached blanket forts with the same analytical precision her mother brought to coffee roasting, and immediately recognized that something was wrong. "Emma?" Sophia stood, 8 years old and already reading social cues like a professional. "Do you want to help with the fort? I'm trying to create a support structure that won't collapse when we add the roof blankets." Emma looked at her father, silently asking permission to escape into the uncomplicated world of childhood architecture. Caleb nodded, and she dropped her soccer bag and joined Sophia in examining the chair placement and blanket tension. Lena stood, wiping her hands on her jeans. How did she take it? Better than I did, honestly. Caleb moved to the counter, the familiar space centering him in a way his own house couldn't right now. She asked if it was her fault, asked if I was okay. She's 9 and she's already taking care of everyone else. Sounds like someone else I know. Lena pulled 2 clean mugs from the shelf and started preparing coffee with the unconscious efficiency of long practice. You eat dinner yet? Not hungry. That wasn't the question. She pulled a container from the small refrigerator behind the counter. I made extra chicken and rice. You're eating. Caleb wanted to argue but recognized the futility. Lena's matter-of-fact caretaking wasn't negotiable, and honestly, he didn't have the energy to fight her. They ate in comfortable silence while the girls constructed their fort, their voices providing a soundtrack of normalcy. Sophia explained structural engineering concepts she'd learned from YouTube videos. Emma suggested aesthetic improvements. They negotiated, compromised, and built something together with the easy collaboration of kids who'd been friends their entire lives. This helps, Caleb said eventually, gesturing at the scene. Being here, not being alone with it. You're never going to be alone with it, Lena said quietly. That's not how friendship works. Vanessa thought we'd spent too much time here. The words came out before Caleb could stop them. Said I treated your cafe like a second home, that it wasn't appropriate for a married man to be so close to another woman. Lena's expression didn't change, but Caleb saw the brief flash of something in her eyes, anger, maybe, or vindication. And you think that's why she left? I think she'd made up her mind long before that. I think she was looking for reasons to justify what she'd already decided. Caleb pushed the empty food container away. I just never thought she'd actually do it, walk away from everything, from Emma. Some people aren't built for the long haul, Lena said. They want the highlights without the daily work. Marriage, parenting, business, it's all the same. The success isn't in the dramatic moments. It's in showing up every single day and doing what needs to be done. Is that what you tell yourself? When you're here at 5 in the morning roasting beans and again at 8 at night cleaning up? I tell myself I'm building something that matters, that Sophia gets to see her mother work hard and succeed, that the people who come here get something genuine in a world full of corporate franchises and artificial experiences. Lena smiled slightly. And yeah, some days I tell myself I'm too stubborn to fail. Caleb laughed despite everything, the sound surprising him. That I believe. They watched the girls complete their fort, draping the final blanket with a flourish and crawling inside to test the acoustics. Their giggles echoed in the empty cafe, a sound of pure childhood joy untouched by adult complications. Thank you, Caleb said again. I know I keep saying it, but I don't know what else to say. You don't have to say anything. Just don't disappear into that house and stop living your life. Emma needs you present, not just physically there. Lena stood, collecting their dishes. And selfishly, I need my best customer and his free accounting advice. I don't charge you for accounting advice. Exactly. Free. She grinned, and Caleb felt some of the weight lift from his chest. They stayed until nearly 10, long past Emma's normal bedtime. The girls fell asleep in their blanket fort, curled up like puppies, and Caleb carefully extracted his daughter without waking Sophia. Same time tomorrow? Lena asked as he carried Emma to the car. I have a preliminary hearing at 9, but I'll be here by lunch. I'll save you the good table. Caleb drove home through quiet streets, Emma sleeping soundly in the passenger seat. The house looked the same from the outside. Same manicured lawn, same welcome mat, same carefully maintained exterior that matched every other house on the block. But crossing the threshold felt different, like entering a stage set instead of a home. He carried Emma to her room, tucked her in, still wearing her soccer clothes because waking her seemed cruel, and stood in her doorway watching her sleep. She looked so young, so vulnerable, and the protective rage that had been building all evening finally found its target. Vanessa had done this, had chosen her own escape over their daughter's stability, had abandoned them both without warning, without conversation, without even the basic decency of a difficult discussion. Caleb moved to the master bedroom, his bedroom now, he supposed, and found the note she'd left on his nightstand. The handwriting was Vanessa's precise script, the kind of penmanship they'd stopped teaching in schools. Caleb, I can't be the person you and Emma need me to be. I've tried for years to fit into this life, but I'm suffocating. I need to find out who I am outside of being a wife and mother. I know this is selfish, but staying would be worse. You and Emma will be better off without me dragging you both down. Don't try to find me. I need space to figure things out. Caleb read it 3 times, analyzing the language the way he'd analyze a fraudulent financial statement. The passive voice, the self-justification, the way she framed abandonment as somehow beneficial to her victims. It was a masterclass in avoiding responsibility. He should have been surprised, should have seen some warning sign in the past weeks or months that this was coming. But looking back with the clarity of hindsight, Caleb realized the signs had been there all along. Vanessa had been emotionally absent for at least a year, going through the motions of family life while clearly being somewhere else mentally. He'd been too focused on work to notice, too comfortable in the routine to question whether the marriage still had substance beneath the surface. His phone buzzed with a text from Lena. Girls asleep? You holding up? Caleb typed back. Emma's out. I'm functional. Thank you for tonight. Anytime. Literally. My phone is always on. He set the phone aside and lay back on the bed, still fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd have to call his parents, notify Emma's school, start the practical work of restructuring their lives around this new reality. Tomorrow he'd have to be the strong, stable parent who had all the answers. Tonight, he let himself feel the full weight of being abandoned by someone he'd built 12 years of his life around. And somewhere between exhaustion and grief, Caleb fell asleep with the light still on and Vanessa's note clutched in his hand. The preliminary hearing at Morrison and Webb the next morning felt surreal, like Caleb was operating his body remotely while his actual consciousness stayed home processing the wreckage. He presented his findings on the Mercer Industries case with his usual precision. 17 instances of revenue manipulation totaling $4.2 million, meticulously documented and cross-referenced. But the satisfaction he normally took in exposing financial fraud felt distant and hollow. His colleague Jennifer Chen cornered him in the hallway after the hearing, her expression concerned. You look like hell. Everything okay? Vanessa left yesterday. Saying it out loud still felt unreal. Just packed up and walked out. Jesus, Caleb, I'm so sorry. Jennifer's concern was genuine. They'd worked together for 6 years, weathered hostile depositions and aggressive defense attorneys together. Do you need time off? I can cover your cases this week. Work is good. Work is normal. Caleb straightened his tie, forcing his mind back into professional mode. Emma and I will figure it out. If you need anything, I know. Thank you. He made it through the rest of the day on autopilot, reviewing documents and preparing depositions while his phone periodically buzzed with concerned messages from his parents and siblings. News traveled fast in families, and Vanessa had apparently called his mother that morning with her own version of events, one that painted herself as a victim of circumstance rather than the architect of abandonment. By the time Caleb picked up Emma from school, he'd fielded 6 family phone calls and declined 4 invitations to come stay with various relatives who were certain he couldn't possibly manage alone. "How was school?" he asked as Emma climbed into the car. "Weird. Everyone kept looking at me funny." She threw her backpack in the back seat. "Did you tell people?" "I told Grandma and Grandpa. I guess word spread." "Great, so now I'm the kid whose mom left." Emma slouched in her seat, suddenly looking much older than 9. "Can we go to Lena's? I don't want to go home yet." Caleb understood the impulse completely. "Yeah, I need to work on the Morrison case anyway. You have homework?" "Math and reading. Sophia said she'd help me with fractions if I helped her with her book report." They fell into a new routine over the next week, one that centered around Morales roasters instead of their empty house. Caleb would pick up Emma from school, drive to the cafe, and set up his laptop at the corner table Lena always kept available. Emma would do homework with Sophia in the back room, emerging periodically to help Lena with small tasks or sample new coffee flavors. It worked better than it should have. The cafe became a buffer against the silence, a place where life continued with comforting consistency. Lena never asked intrusive questions or offered unwanted advice. She just made excellent coffee, fed them when they forgot to eat, and provided the kind of steady presence that made everything feel slightly less overwhelming. "You know people are going to talk," Emma said one evening while they drove home, "about us spending so much time at Lena's." Caleb glanced at his daughter, surprised by her awareness. "Let them talk. Lena's our friend. Friends help each other." "Mom used to say—" Emma stopped herself, looking uncomfortable. "What did she say?" "That Lena wanted to steal you, that she was inappropriate." Emma picked at a loose thread on her soccer bag. "I never believed her. Lena's not like that." Caleb felt anger spike through him, not at Emma, but at Vanessa for poisoning their daughter's perceptions. "Your mom was wrong about a lot of things. Lena has never been anything but a good friend to both of us." "I know. I just thought you should know what she used to say." They drove in silence for a moment before Emma spoke again, her voice smaller. "Dad, is Mom coming back?" "I don't think so, sweetheart." "Good." The word came out fierce and certain. "I don't want her to, not after what she did." And Caleb wanted to counsel forgiveness, to be the bigger person, to model healthy emotional processing. But he couldn't quite manage it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "It's okay to be angry," he said instead. "What she did was wrong. You're allowed to feel however you feel about it." Emma nodded, and they drove the rest of the way home in companionable silence. Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after Vanessa's departure, Caleb was deep in the Mercer Industries depositions when Lena appeared at his table looking uncharacteristically rattled. "I need your eyes on something," she said without preamble. "Legal document. I don't understand half the language, and it's making my stomach hurt." Caleb closed his laptop immediately. In 5 years of friendship, he'd never seen Lena ask for help with that particular edge in her voice. She led him to her small office behind the roasting room, a cluttered space that smelled perpetually of coffee and contained a desk drowning in paperwork, sample bags, and Sophia's drawings. Lena handed him a thick envelope, already opened, with an official-looking letterhead. Caleb scanned the document, his forensic accountant's brain automatically parsing the legal terminology and identifying the key points. What he found made his jaw tighten. "This is an eviction notice," he said slowly. "From Sterling Development Group. They're claiming the cafe's ventilation system violates the building lease terms and demanding you vacate in 30 days. "That's impossible." Lena's voice was tight. "The ventilation system was approved by the original landlord 8 years ago. I have had paperwork confirming the approval. Everything was legitimate." "The notice says no approval exists in their records." Caleb kept reading, his analytical mind cataloging details. "Sterling Development acquired this building 6 months ago when the previous landlord died. They're claiming the ventilation installation was unauthorized and constitutes a material breach of lease. The paperwork was in the basement storage, along with all the other building documents. Lena pressed her hands flat on the desk, clearly working to stay calm. There was a pipe burst 3 months ago, flooding. Most of the old records were destroyed. Convenient timing. Caleb's tone was flat, professional. He'd seen too many cases of strategic record destruction to believe in coincidence. What does this mean? Can they actually force me out? Caleb flipped to the second page, reading the detailed claims and the settlement offer at the end. They're offering you $15,000 to vacate voluntarily within 2 weeks. If you refuse, they'll pursue formal eviction and legal costs. $15,000. Lena's laugh was bitter. I've put 8 years and every dollar I had into this place. $15,000 doesn't even cover my equipment costs. They're counting on you not having resources to fight them. Caleb set down the document, his mind already shifting into the strategic mode he used for fraud cases. This is a squeeze play. Buy the building cheap, force out the existing tenant with fabricated violations, then lease to someone who'll pay triple the rent. So I'm screwed. No. Caleb met her eyes, and something shifted in his chest, a fierce protective instinct that went beyond friendship. You're not screwed. You're under attack, which is different, and attacks can be defended against if you know what you're doing. Do you know what you're doing? I've spent 14 years tracking money through corporate shells and exposing fraud. If Sterling Development is playing games with property records and legal documents, I'll find the proof. He picked up the eviction notice again, studying it with renewed focus. Tell me everything about the original lease approval. Dates, names, any documentation you remember. Lena pulled up a chair and they spent the next 2 hours reconstructing 8 years of cafe history. She showed him her original lease, signed by Martin Reeves, the previous building owner. She pulled out permits, inspection reports, and a letter from Reeves explicitly approving the ventilation installation with detailed specifications. This is solid, Caleb said, photographing each document with his phone. The approval was legitimate. The question is whether Sterling Development actually lost the records in the flood or deliberately destroyed them. How do we prove that? We start with the building's ownership transfer. When Reeves died, his estate would have provided documentation to the new owners. I need to see the transfer paperwork, the title search, everything that changed hands. Caleb was already making notes, his brain building the investigation framework. And I need access to Sterling's corporate structure. See who actually owns them, where their money comes from, what their pattern is with property acquisitions. Caleb, I can't afford to hire you as an attorney. Good thing I'm not an attorney. I'm a forensic accountant who happens to be very good at finding things people try to hide. He looked up from his notes. And I'm your friend, which means this is personal. Nobody squeezes my friends. Lena's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears if she were the crying type. Why are you doing this? Because you stood in my driveway last week and promised you weren't going anywhere. Because you fed my daughter and gave us a place to exist when our house felt like a crime scene. Because someone needs to and I'm qualified. Caleb stood, gathering the documents. And because these corporate vultures are counting on you being too small and too scared to fight back. I really hate it when bullies win. I don't know what to say. Say you'll let me help. Say you trust me to handle this. He paused. And say you won't sign anything or talk to Sterling without running it past me first. Done. All of the above. Lena stood as well, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the cluttered desk. Something passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe, of the way their friendship was shifting into something more complex under pressure. The moment broke when Sophia and Emma burst into the office, faces painted with chocolate from the cookies Lena had made that morning. Dad! Sophia taught me how to steam milk! Emma was vibrating with excitement. Can we get an espresso machine at home? Absolutely not, Caleb said automatically, but he was smiling. You're 9. You don't need the ability to make espresso. But Dad, no espresso machine. Final answer. Emma pouted dramatically, but her eyes were bright and alive in a way they hadn't been all week. She disappeared back into the cafe with Sophia, already plotting her next campaign. She's doing okay, Lena observed, considering. Better than okay. Better than she was with Vanessa here, honestly. Caleb hadn't meant to say it out loud, but the truth felt important. She's lighter, like she doesn't have to tiptoe around someone's moods anymore. Kids know, even when we think we're hiding it. Caleb nodded slowly, acknowledging a truth he'd been avoiding. His marriage had been broken long before Vanessa left. Emma had been living with that tension, that emotional dishonesty, for who knew how long. Maybe Vanessa leaving wasn't the catastrophe he'd thought it was. Maybe it was just the truth finally becoming visible. "I'm going to fix this," he said, gesturing at the eviction notice. "Sterling Development picked the wrong cafe to mess with." "Because you're stubborn?" "Because I'm very good at my job, and my job is finding proof that powerful people are lying." Caleb smiled grimly. "And because I have nothing but time now that I'm not pretending to have a functional marriage. That's a terrible reason to take on a corporate developer. Good thing I have better reasons, too." They locked eyes again, and Caleb felt that same shift, like tectonic plates sliding into new alignment. Something was changing between them, something that had maybe been building for years beneath the surface of friendship. But now wasn't the time to examine it. Now was the time to fight. "Thank you," Lena said quietly, "for being willing to try. Thank me when we win." Caleb gathered his laptop and papers, called Emma away from her cookie-fueled adventures with Sophia, and headed home. But his mind was already working through the investigation, building timelines and identifying the gaps in Sterling's story. Somewhere in the documented history of that building transfer was proof. Somewhere in Sterling Development's corporate structure was a pattern. And Caleb Turner had never met a financial secret he couldn't expose given enough time and determination. The weekend passed in a blur of research. Caleb set up his home office as an investigation center, covering his desk with printed documents, sticky notes mapping corporate connections, and timeline charts tracking the building's ownership history. He started with public records, property transfers, LLC registrations, business filings. Sterling Development Group was registered in Delaware, a common strategy for companies wanting to obscure their ownership structure. But Delaware corporations still left traces, and Caleb had spent years learning how to follow them. The building at Harbor and Vine had been owned by Martin Reeves personally until his death 6 months ago. His estate had sold it to Sterling Development for $1.2 million, significantly below market value for the waterfront location. The sale had gone through probate quickly, suspiciously quickly for a property transfer involving a deceased owner's estate. Caleb dug deeper, pulling Reeves' obituary and death certificate. Natural causes, apparently, though the timing felt convenient. He made a note to check the estate's settlement details, see who had been executor and whether they had any connection to Sterling. Sterling Development itself was interesting. Registered 2 years ago, it had acquired 7 properties in Seattle's waterfront district in the past 18 months. All of them had been purchased below market value from motivated sellers. Estate sales, distressed owners, small landlords facing financial pressure. A pattern was emerging. Sterling wasn't just opportunistic. They were systematic. "Dad," Emma appeared in the doorway, holding Sophia's drawing from earlier. "Are you working on Lena's problem?" "Yeah, trying to figure out how to help her keep the cafe." "Are you going to win?" Caleb looked at his daughter's serious face, seeing both innocence and hard-earned realism in her expression. "I'm going to try my best. Sometimes that's all we can do." "But you're really good at your job. You told me you always find the truth." "I do always find the truth. Whether that truth is enough to win is sometimes out of my control." He gestured at the papers covering his desk. "But I promise you I'm going to do everything I can to protect Lena's cafe." Emma nodded, satisfied with the honesty. "She's important to us. We can't let bad guys take away her store." "No, we can't." His daughter left him to his research, and Caleb returned to the corporate maze. He traced Sterling's ownership back through 3 shell companies before hitting a wall, a trust registered in Nevada with privacy protections that would take a court order to penetrate. But even walls left shadows. Cross-referencing the properties Sterling had acquired, Caleb found a name that appeared in multiple transactions. Victor Kane, listed as consultant on 4 different property transfers. A quick search revealed Kane's background: former commercial real estate attorney, current property development specialist, and according to multiple online reviews from displaced tenants, an absolute shark who specialized in forcing out existing renters to flip buildings for maximum profit. Caleb sat back, studying Kane's professional photo on his LLC's website. Mid-50s, expensive suit, smile that didn't reach his eyes. This was the person behind Sterling Development, the one orchestrating Lena's eviction. His phone rang, Lena's name on the screen. They moved up the timeline, she said without greeting, her voice tight. New notice arrived by courier 20 minutes ago. They want me out in 7 days, not 30. Claim the ventilation system poses an immediate safety hazard, and they're liable if anything happens. That's a lie designed to create pressure. Caleb was already pulling up his notes on Washington state eviction law. They can't actually enforce a 7-day eviction without a court order, which takes time. The letter says if I don't voluntarily vacate, they'll file for emergency eviction Monday morning and pursue all legal remedies, including damages for holdover tenancy. Empty threats, well, mostly empty. Caleb heard the strain in her voice, the fear beneath the anger. Lena, listen to me. This is a pressure tactic. They're trying to scare you into taking their lowball buyout before you can mount a defense. It's working. I'm scared. Good. Fear means you're taking it seriously, but don't let fear make you quit. He stood, pacing his office. I found some things today. The guy behind Sterling is named Victor Kane. He's done this exact same play with at least 4 other properties in the area. Force out the tenant, claim violations, offer pennies compared to actual value. So I'm just another mark in his pattern. You're a mark who happens to have a forensic accountant willing to fight dirty. That's different. Caleb made a decision. Don't respond to the new notice. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Monday morning, we're going to request a formal mediation before this goes to court. What's mediation going to do except delay the inevitable? It's going to force Sterling to put their evidence on record. They're claiming the ventilation approval doesn't exist. In mediation, they have to produce documentation supporting that claim. And if they can't produce it, or if their documentation is fabricated, we have grounds for a countersuit. You really think we can win this? Caleb looked at the investigation spread across his desk. The pattern of acquisitions, the suspicious timing, the corporate shell game designed to hide Kane's involvement. Somewhere in this maze was proof that Sterling Development had deliberately destroyed or hidden Lena's approval documents. He just had to find it. I think we have a fighting chance, he said, and I think Kane underestimated who he was dealing with. A coffee roaster and a forensic accountant? A woman who rebuilt her entire business after her husband abandoned it, and a man who's really good at finding evidence people try to hide. Yeah, I think he underestimated us badly. Lena was quiet for a moment. Caleb, thank you for not letting me face this alone. You stood with me when my life fell apart. This is what friends do. They show up when it matters. After hanging up, Caleb returned to his research with renewed focus. Somewhere in Sterling's corporate structure or Kane's pattern of acquisitions was the weakness he needed. Some piece of evidence that would prove Lena's eviction was fraudulent and expose the machinery behind it. He worked late into the night, building case files the way he would for any fraud investigation. Document every transaction, map every connection, identify every inconsistency. The truth was buried somewhere in the paper trail. It always was. Around midnight, Caleb found something promising. One of Sterling's previous property acquisitions had resulted in a lawsuit from the displaced tenant. The case had been settled out of court with confidentiality provisions, but the initial complaint was public record. He pulled the filing and read through 40 pages of allegations that sounded eerily familiar. Fabricated lease violations, destroyed documentation, pressure tactics designed to force quick capitulation. The tenant had been a small bookstore owner who couldn't afford prolonged litigation and had eventually accepted a settlement that barely covered her moving costs. But the complaint named Victor Kane directly and included email evidence showing he'd been involved in the property transfer from the beginning. It established pattern, motive, and methodology. It was exactly what Caleb needed to build his case. He sent the complaint to his printer, added it to his growing file, and finally allowed himself to feel something like hope. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Sterling Development had made one critical mistake. They'd assumed Lena would be isolated, scared, and unable to fight back. They'd assumed she was alone. They were wrong on every count. And Caleb Turner was going to make sure they paid for that miscalculation. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray Seattle drizzle that made the city feel smaller and more claustrophobic. Caleb stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie with the same precision he'd brought to every court appearance over the past 14 years. Navy suit, white shirt, burgundy tie. The uniform of credibility. Emma appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school in jeans and her soccer team hoodie. You look like you're going to trial. Close. Mediation. Caleb turned from the mirror, checking his watch. Which is like trial's more polite cousin. Same stakes, less drama. Are you nervous? Focused. He grabbed his briefcase from the bed, the weight of documentation inside reassuring. There's a difference. Lena's nervous. I heard her on the phone with Sophia's grandmother last night when we were doing homework. She was trying to sound calm, but her voice was all tight. Caleb paused, studying his daughter's observant face. 9 years old, and she already read people better than most adults. How do you feel about all this? Honestly. Emma shrugged, but her expression was serious. I don't want Lena to lose her cafe. It's our place, where we go when home feels wrong. The admission hit harder than Caleb expected. He knelt down to Emma's level, meeting her eyes. I'm going to do everything I can to protect that place. But I need you to understand that sometimes bad people have money and lawyers, and good people lose even when they're right. You said you always find the truth. I do. But finding the truth and winning aren't always the same thing. He stood, shouldering his briefcase. That's why I'm bringing everything I've got today. Every piece of evidence, every connection, every inconsistency in their story. If there's a way to win this, I'm going to find it. Emma hugged him suddenly, fierce and tight. I know you will. You're the smartest person I know. Caleb held his daughter close, drawing strength from her absolute faith in him. Then he kissed the top of her head, grabbed his car keys, and headed out into the drizzle. The mediation was scheduled for 9 at a downtown office building that housed Sterling Development's attorneys. Caleb had argued for neutral ground, but Kane's lawyers had insisted on home territory. It was a power play. One more way to remind Lena she was outmatched. He picked her up at the cafe at 8:30. She was waiting outside in a black dress and blazer, her hair pulled back in a professional twist that made her look older and more severe than usual. The anxiety was visible in the tight set of her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her purse. You clean up nice, Caleb said as she climbed into the passenger seat. I feel like I'm going to a funeral. Lena buckled her seatbelt with shaking hands. Maybe I am. The funeral of my business. Stop. Caleb's voice was firm but not unkind. That kind of thinking is what they're counting on. They want you defeated before you even walk in the room. I don't know how to do this. How to fight people with lawyers and money and power. That's why I'm here. You focus on knowing your business and your rights. I'll handle the evidence and the strategy. He pulled into traffic, navigating toward downtown. And Lena? You've already won fights most people lose. You rebuilt your cafe after your husband tried to destroy it. You raised Sophia alone while building a business from scratch. This is just another fight. This feels different, bigger. It is bigger, but you're not the same person you were 6 years ago. You're stronger than you think. Lena looked at him, something shifting in her expression. How are you so calm? Your life just fell apart too. My life was falling apart for a while. Vanessa just made it visible. Caleb changed lanes, his mind already running through the presentation he'd prepared. And honestly, having something concrete to fight helps. I can't control my wife leaving or fix Emma's pain, but I can analyze documents and expose corporate fraud. This is something I know how to do. They drove in silence for a few blocks before Lena spoke again, quieter. What if we lose? Then we lose with our heads up, knowing we fought as hard as we could, and we figure out the next step. He glanced at her. But we're not going to lose. I found things, Lena. Patterns in Kane's acquisitions, inconsistencies in Sterling's documentation, evidence that they've done this exact same thing to at least 3 other tenants. We have ammunition. Enough to win? Enough to make them very uncomfortable, which is a start. Bull? The Sterling Development attorneys occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower that probably cost more per month than Lena's entire annual rent. Caleb noted the expensive artwork in the lobby, the receptionist's designer suit, the general atmosphere of money and power designed to intimidate. Remember, he murmured as they waited in the reception area, all of this is theater, the fancy office, the expensive lawyers, the intimidation tactics. None of it changes the facts of your case. A paralegal appeared, young and professionally pleasant. Ms. Morales? Mr. Turner? They're ready for you in conference room A. They followed her down a hallway lined with photographs of Sterling's development projects. Sleek, modern buildings, gentrified neighborhoods, progress reports showing climbing property values. Caleb studied each image, noting the pattern. Old buildings demolished, longtime tenants displaced, communities fundamentally altered. Conference room A was exactly what Caleb expected. Massive table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. 3 people waited inside. Victor Kane stood at the head of the table, exactly matching his professional photos. Mid-50s, silver hair, expensive suit that probably cost more than Lena's monthly revenue. His smile was practiced and completely insincere. "Miss Morales, thank you for coming." Kane extended his hand. Lena shook it briefly, her face carefully neutral. "I'm Victor Kane, principal consultant for Sterling Development. This is Margaret Chen, our lead attorney, and David Foster, property management director." The attorney was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and sharper suit. Foster was younger, maybe 30, with the eager expression of someone trying to prove themselves. Kane's gaze shifted to Caleb, assessment flickering across his features. "And you are?" "Caleb Turner, Ms. Chell, Morales' financial advisor and consultant." Caleb set his briefcase on the table, projecting confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Forensic accountant with Morrison and Webb." Something changed in Kane's expression, a subtle tightening around the eyes. He knew the firm's reputation. "Good." "I wasn't aware Ms. Morales would be bringing representation," Margaret Chen said smoothly. "This is supposed to be an informal mediation. Mr. Turner isn't acting as legal counsel," Caleb replied before Lena could speak. "He's here to help me understand the financial and documentary aspects of your claims. Surely Sterling Development doesn't object to Ms. Morales having someone help her understand complex legal documents?" Chen's smile was professionally glacial. "Of course not. Shall we begin?" They all sat, Kane at the head of the table, his attorneys flanking him. Lena and Caleb on the opposite side, outnumbered but not outmatched. Caleb opened his briefcase, pulling out his organized files with deliberate precision. "Miss Morales," Kane began, his tone radiating false sympathy, "I want you to understand that Sterling Development takes no pleasure in this situation. When we acquired the Harbor Avenue property, we inherited certain complications. Your cafe's ventilation system represents a significant liability." "The system was approved by the previous owner," Lena said, her voice steadier than Caleb expected. "I have documentation." "We've found no such documentation in our records." Foster pulled out his own file, producing property transfer documents. "The building's sale included all existing leases and improvement records. No ventilation approval exists." "Because you destroyed it," Caleb said calmly, "or conveniently lost it during the basement flooding 3 months ago." Chen's expression sharpened. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Turner. It's a factual observation based on timeline analysis." Caleb pulled out his own documents, sliding them across the table. "The pipe burst occurred on January 15th. Sterling Development acquired the building on December 10th. 2 months earlier, you had access to all building records. The timing of the flooding is remarkably convenient for eliminating documentation that contradicts your eviction claims." Kane's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "Accidents happen, Mr. Turner. We can't be held responsible for a plumbing failure." "Of course not, but you can be held responsible for what happened to those records before the flooding." Caleb pulled out another document. "According to the building's maintenance logs, which I obtained from the city's inspection database, the basement storage area was accessed 17 times between December 10th and January 15th. 11 of those accesses were by Sterling Development personnel, including one access on January 14th, the day before the pipe burst." The room went very quiet. Foster glanced at Kane, who remained impassive. "You're suggesting we deliberately caused the flooding?" Chen's voice was sharp. "I'm suggesting the timing is suspicious and warrants investigation." Caleb kept his tone professional, factual. "But let's set aside the flooding for a moment. Ms. Morales has a letter from the previous owner, Martin Reeves, explicitly approving the ventilation installation. The letter is dated, notarized, and references specific building codes and permit numbers." He slid the letter across the table. Kane barely glanced at it. A letter proves nothing without corresponding building department approvals, Kane said dismissively. Anyone can write a letter. True. Which is why I also pulled the permits from Seattle's building department. Caleb produced another stack of documents. Ventilation permit number VI-2016-4472. Approved September 23, 2016. Inspection completed October 2, 2016. Final approval October 10th. All properly filed and documented in the city's permanent records. Chen took the documents, scanning them quickly. Her professional mask slipped for just a moment, long enough for Caleb to see he'd scored a direct hit. The permits are in order, she admitted reluctantly. But that doesn't change the fact that our structural engineer has identified safety concerns with the current installation. Then let's see the engineer's report. Caleb extended his hand. Independent structural assessment certified by a licensed professional, clearly identifying specific code violations. Foster hesitated, looking to Kane for guidance. The report is being finalized, Kane said smoothly. We'll provide it when it's complete. Convenient. You're demanding Ms. Morales Vacat based on safety concerns you can't actually document. Caleb leaned back, studying Kane with the same analytical precision he'd use on a hostile witness. Let me guess. The report will miraculously appear the day before any court hearing, giving Ms. Morales no time to obtain her own independent assessment. We're not required to share preliminary reports, Chen interjected. No, but you are required to have actual evidence before forcing a tenant's eviction. Right now, all you have are claims contradicted by official city permits and the previous owner's written approval. Caleb pulled out another file. Which brings me to my next question. When Sterling Development purchased this building, did you receive a complete title search and property disclosure? Of course, Foster said quickly. Standard procedure for any acquisition. Then you received Martin Reeves' estate documentation, including the schedule of tenant improvements and lease modifications. The estate provided standard documents. Including lease modification agreements? Caleb pressed. Foster glanced at Chen, who remained silent. I'll take that as a no. Caleb pulled out a document bearing the seal of King County Probate Court. Because I pulled the estate settlement records. Martin Reeves' executor was his daughter, Patricia Reeves Collins. She provided Sterling Development with a complete property disclosure package on November 20th, 6 weeks before the sale closed. That package included a schedule of all tenant improvements, including Ms. Morales' ventilation system, clearly marked as approved. He slid the probate record across the table. So either Sterling Development never actually reviewed the documents you received, or you reviewed them and chose to ignore evidence that contradicted your plans for the property. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Chen was reading the probate record carefully, her expression darkening. Foster looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Kane's facade of friendly concern had completely evaporated, replaced by cold calculation. This is an ambush, Kane said flatly. We came here for good faith mediation, and instead we're being accused of fraud. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, Caleb replied calmly. I'm simply presenting documented facts. Facts that suggest Sterling Development had full knowledge of Ms. Morales' approved ventilation system before acquiring the property and chose to claim otherwise to facilitate her eviction. Why would we do that? Foster asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Because you've done it before. Caleb pulled out his final file, the one he'd been saving. 3 times in the past 18 months, Sterling Development has acquired properties with existing tenants, claimed lease violations based on missing or destroyed documentation, and forced those tenants out with lowball settlement offers. Each time, the property was subsequently leased to new tenants at rates 3 to 4 times higher than the previous rent. He spread out the documents, the bookstore case, 2 restaurant evictions, and a printing shop displacement, each showing the same pattern, the same methodology, the same consultant's name appearing in the transaction records. This is your business model, Mr. Kane. Acquire properties with below-market leases, manufacture violations to force out existing tenants, then maximize profit with new leases. It's systematic, it's calculated, and in Ms. Morales' case, it's completely transparent. Kane stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This meeting is over. Sit down, Victor. Chen's voice was sharp. We need to address this. There's nothing to address. This is harassment masquerading as mediation. But Kane sat anyway, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. Chen turned to Caleb, professional mask firmly back in place. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Turner. I assume you have evidence to support them?" "Every document I've presented today is from public records or court filings. Nothing speculative, nothing fabricated." Caleb gestured at the papers spread across the table. "The pattern is clear. The methodology is consistent. And in Ms. Morales' case, the evidence directly contradicts Sterling Development's eviction claims." "What exactly are you proposing?" Chen asked. Caleb glanced at Lena, who nodded slightly. They'd discussed this scenario, planned for the moment when Sterling realized they had real evidence. "Ms. Morales withdraws from this mediation," Caleb said. "She continues operating her cafe under the existing lease terms. Sterling Development acknowledges the ventilation system was properly approved and drops all eviction proceedings. In exchange, Ms. Morales agrees not to pursue legal action regarding the questionable circumstances of your eviction attempt." "Absolutely not," Kane snapped. "We're not backing down from legitimate safety concerns because some accountant produced a pile of paperwork." "Then we go to court," Caleb said simply, "where all of this becomes public record, where I testify about Sterling's pattern of tenant displacement, where the local news picks up the story of a corporate developer bullying a single mother out of her small business using fabricated violations. How do you think that plays, Mr. Kane? Especially when I provide them with documentation showing you've done this before? Is that a threat? It's a realistic assessment of what happens next if we can't resolve this here." Caleb began gathering his documents, movements deliberately casual. "Ms. Morales is prepared to fight. She has evidence, she has legal standing, and she has a compelling narrative. You have a structural engineer's report that doesn't exist yet, and a pattern of questionable acquisitions that suggests predatory business practices." Chen leaned back in her chair, studying Caleb with grudging respect. "You're very well prepared for a financial advisor who supposedly just got involved. I've spent 2 weeks investigating this case. When someone threatens my friend's livelihood, I take it personally." Caleb met her gaze directly. "And I'm very good at my job." The attorney turned to Kane, her expression unreadable. "We should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," Kane insisted. "We have legitimate—" "Victor." Chen's tone allowed no argument. "Private conversation. Now." She stood, gesturing for Foster to follow. The 3 Sterling representatives left the room, closing the door behind them. Lena exhaled shakily, the tension draining from her shoulders. That was terrifying. "You did great." Caleb was already reviewing his notes, anticipating Sterling's next move. "Stayed calm, didn't give them anything to use against you. They're going to come back and reject everything, aren't they?" "Maybe. Probably." Caleb looked up from his notes. "But they're also calculating risk right now. Chen's smart enough to recognize we have real ammunition. Kane's arrogant enough to think he can bulldoze through anyway. The question is which one wins the argument." "What if Kane wins?" "Then we file a formal response to the eviction notice, request discovery, and make this as public and painful as possible. Sterling Development operates on the assumption that small tenants can't afford to fight back. We prove them wrong." Lena stood, pacing to the windows overlooking the bay. The rain had intensified, streaking the glass and blurring the view. "I can't believe this is my life. 2 weeks ago, my biggest problem was whether to add a new espresso blend to the menu. Now I'm fighting for my business in a corporate conference room. Life has a way of escalating fast." Caleb thought of his own situation, 2 weeks ago, married with a stable home life. Now, single father fighting his closest friend's legal battle while trying to hold his own life together. But we adapt. We find the people who'll stand with us, and we figure it out. Is that what we're doing? Standing with each other? Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. Lena turned from the window, and their eyes met across the expensive conference room. Something passed between them, unspoken but unmistakable. The friendship that had sustained them through parallel divorces and single parenthood was shifting into something deeper, something neither of them had planned, but both recognized. The door opened, breaking the moment. Chen entered alone, her expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Kane has requested additional time to review the documents you've presented," she said. "We're adjourning this mediation for 1 week. Sterling Development will provide Ms. Morales with a formal response by next Monday." "The eviction deadline is Friday," Lena said. 5 days from now." "The deadline is suspended pending our response." Chen's tone was crisp. Final. You will not be required to vacate while we review the situation. It was a retreat, Caleb realized. Not a surrender, but definitely a tactical withdrawal. Kane needed time to assess the damage, figure out if fighting was worth the risk. We'll expect your response by Monday at 5 p.m., Caleb said, standing and extending his hand. And Ms. Chen? If Sterling Development attempts any further harassment or intimidation tactics while we wait for that response, we'll be filing for a restraining order, just so we're clear. Chen shook his hand briefly. Crystal clear, Mr. Turner. They left the building in silence, not speaking until they were safely in Caleb's car with the doors closed against the rain. Did we just win? Lena asked. We won this round. Forced them to back off and reassess. Caleb started the engine, warm air flooding the car. But this isn't over. Kane doesn't strike me as someone who accepts defeat gracefully. What do you think he'll do? Try to find leverage we don't know about. Dig into your business records looking for any violation he can exploit. Maybe hire that structural engineer to actually write a report finding problems. Caleb pulled into traffic, windshield wipers fighting the downpour. But he knows we're prepared now. Knows we have evidence and we're willing to fight. That changes the calculation. How long can this go on? Weeks, maybe months if they're stubborn, but every delay works in your favor. Your lease is valid, your permits are in order, and time gives us more opportunity to build our case. He glanced at her. Can the cafe survive a prolonged fight? Financially? Barely? Emotionally? Lena rubbed her temples. I don't know, Caleb. This is exhausting, and we're just getting started. Then we pace ourselves. Take it 1 week at a time, one challenge at a time. He reached over, squeezing her hand briefly. And we remember why we're fighting. That cafe is your life's work. It's where Sophia grew up, where Emma found a second home. It's worth protecting. Lena's fingers tightened around his before letting go. Thank you for everything you did in there. I would have folded in 5 minutes without you. You're stronger than you think. You just needed someone to help you see the battlefield clearly. They drove through the rain-soaked city, neither speaking but both processing what had just happened. Caleb's mind was already working through contingencies, anticipating Sterling's next moves, preparing for whatever Kane threw at them next. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. How did it go? Did you win? Caleb typed back. First round to us, still fighting, home by 3 to pick you up. Emma's response was immediate. Tell Lena we're proud of her. He showed Lena the message. She smiled for the first time since they'd left the cafe that morning. Something genuine breaking through the stress. That kid is special, she said. She learned from the best. You and Sophia showed her what strong women look like. She had a pretty good example of strength at home, too. Single dad, raising her alone, fighting her battles while managing his own. Lena looked at him directly. You don't give yourself enough credit, Caleb. I give myself exactly the appropriate amount of credit. No more, no less. That's very you. Precise and mathematical even about self-assessment. They reached the cafe, the rain finally easing to a light mist. Morales Roasters looked warm and welcoming through the front windows, a handful of afternoon customers visible inside. Normal life, continuing despite the corporate battle being waged around it. You should open, Caleb said. Get back to your routine. I'll keep working on the investigation. Prepare for whatever Sterling sends next week. Lena didn't move to leave the car. Can I ask you something? Personal? Always? How are you doing? Really doing, not the functional facade you show everyone else. Caleb considered lying, defaulting to the professional composure that had carried him through 2 weeks of crisis. But this was Lena, who'd stood in his driveway and promised not to leave when everyone else had. I'm angry, he admitted, at Vanessa for abandoning Emma, at myself for not seeing it coming, at the whole situation for being so completely out of my control. He stared through the windshield at the cafe. Fighting for your business helps. Gives me something concrete to fix when my own life is unfixable. Your life isn't unfixable. No, just fundamentally different than what I planned. Different than what I thought I was building. Maybe what you're building now is better. Lena's voice was quiet. More honest. More sustainable. Maybe. Caleb turned to face her. But it's terrifying either way. Yeah, it really is. They sat together in the car, rain pattering gently on the roof, both processing the morning's battle and the larger wars they were fighting in their own lives. Outside, the cafe's neon sign flickered on despite the afternoon light, a small beacon of normalcy in an increasingly complicated world. Finally, Lena reached for the door handle. Thank you again for standing with me today, for being willing to fight when you had every reason to focus on your own problems. Your problems are my problems. That's how this works. She smiled, got out, and hurried through the mist into the cafe. Caleb watched her go, this woman who'd become so central to his life without him quite noticing when it happened. His phone buzzed again. Jennifer Chen from Morrison & Webb. Heard you're taking on Sterling Development. Need backup? I know some property law specialists who owe me favors. Caleb smiled. Word traveled fast in Seattle's legal community. He typed back, might take you up on that. I'll keep you posted. He drove to his office, spent the afternoon reviewing contracts and preparing depositions for his actual paying cases, but his mind kept circling back to Sterling Development and Victor Kane. Something about the whole situation felt wrong beyond the obvious predatory business practices. Kane was too confident, even after being confronted with solid evidence. He'd retreated tactically, but hadn't shown the concern Caleb would expect from someone whose pattern had been exposed. Either Kane was phenomenally arrogant, or he had leverage that hadn't surfaced yet. At 2:30, Caleb's office phone rang. The receptionist sounded uncertain. Mr. Turner, there's someone here to see you. Says it's about the Morales case. He doesn't have an appointment. Name. David Foster, from Sterling Development. Caleb sat up straighter, mind racing. Foster, the junior property manager who'd looked so uncomfortable during the mediation. Why would he show up unannounced at Caleb's office? Send him back. Foster appeared moments later, looking even younger and more uncertain than he had that morning. His expensive suit was slightly rumpled, his tie loosened. He looked like someone who'd been arguing strenuously and lost. Mr. Turner, thank you for seeing me. Foster glanced around the office, clearly uncomfortable. I know this is irregular. Sit down. Caleb gestured to the chair across from his desk. You want to tell me what you're really doing here? Foster sat, running his hands through his hair. I'm probably going to lose my job for this. Then make it count. What do you know? The basement flooding. Foster spoke quickly, words tumbling out. It wasn't an accident. Kane ordered it. Had a maintenance contractor deliberately damage the pipes to flood the storage area and destroy the old lease records. Caleb kept his expression neutral, despite the surge of satisfaction. Can you prove it? I have emails, work orders, payment records showing Kane authorized a contractor visit the day before the flood with no legitimate maintenance reason. Foster pulled a flash drive from his pocket, setting it on the desk. Everything's on here, including similar documentation from the other properties where records were conveniently lost or destroyed. Why are you giving this to me? Because this isn't what I signed up for. I wanted to work in property development, help revitalize neighborhoods, create value, not destroy people's businesses through fraud. Foster's voice cracked slightly. That woman today, Miss Morales, she reminded me of my mom. Single parent, small business owner, just trying to survive. And we're ruining her life for what? So Kane can flip another property and add another million to his portfolio? If you testify to this, it'll be public. Your career in real estate could be over. My career is already over if I stay with Sterling. I can't do this anymore. Can't be part of it. Foster stood, leaving the flash drive on the desk. Use it however you need to. Just protect Miss Morales. She deserves better than what we were trying to do to her. He left before Caleb could respond, closing the door quietly behind him. Caleb stared at the flash drive, processing the implications. This was the evidence he'd hoped to find through weeks of investigation, handed to him gift-wrapped by a guilty conscience. He plugged the drive into his computer, scanning through folders of emails, work orders, and financial records. It was all there. The deliberate flooding, the pattern across multiple properties, Kane's direct involvement in orchestrating the document destruction. It was enough to bury Sterling Development, enough to force Kane into settlement and guarantee Lena's cafe was safe. Caleb pulled out his phone, called Lena's cell. Hey, she answered, background noise of the cafe audible. Everything okay? Better than okay. I just got handed the smoking gun. Sterling's junior property manager defected, brought documentation proving Kane ordered the basement flooding deliberately. Silence on the other end, then Lena's shaky exhale. You're serious. Completely. This changes everything. Kane can't fight us when we have proof of deliberate fraud. So it's over? We won? Not yet, but we're about to. Caleb was already mentally drafting the message he'd send to Margaret Chen. I need to review everything carefully, make sure it's all legitimate and admissible. But yeah, Lena, I think we just won. I don't know what to say. Say you'll trust me to finish this, and maybe celebrate a little. You earned it. After they hung up, Caleb spent the next 3 hours reviewing Foster's files, cross-referencing them with his own investigation, building an airtight case. By the time he left to pick up Emma, he had everything he needed to force Sterling Development's surrender. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming. Caleb drove to Emma's school feeling lighter than he had in weeks, maybe months. Emma bounced into the car, immediately reading his expression. Something good happened. Something very good happened. We got the evidence we needed to protect Lena's cafe. So she gets to stay? She gets to stay? Emma's whoop of joy made him laugh. Can we tell her? Can we go there now? Yeah, we can do that. They found Lena closing the cafe for the day, wiping down tables while Sophia swept the floor. Both girls started talking at once when Emma burst through the door with the news, their voices overlapping in excited celebration. Lena met Caleb's eyes across the cafe, and he saw tears she was fighting to control. Relief, gratitude, and something deeper he wasn't quite ready to name. Thank you, she mouthed silently. He nodded, knowing words weren't necessary. They'd stood together through the fight, and they'd won because neither had been willing to surrender. Outside, the evening light turned golden as the clouds finally broke apart. Inside Morales Roasters, 2 single parents and their daughters celebrated a victory that was about more than just keeping a business. It was about proving that sometimes the right people show up exactly when you need them most, and sometimes fighting back actually works. The celebration lasted exactly 20 minutes before reality reasserted itself. Caleb's phone buzzed with an email notification, and the sender's name made his stomach tighten. Margaret Chen, Sterling Development Legal Counsel. He stepped away from the girls' excited chatter, opening the message with the wariness of someone who'd learned that corporate attorneys never sent good news after business hours. The email was brief and professionally threatening. Sterling Development rejected all allegations of impropriety, considered Caleb's presentation at mediation to be defamatory in nature, and was now pursuing emergency eviction proceedings citing immediate safety hazards. A hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning, 3 days away. Miss Morales was required to appear with legal representation or face default judgment. What's wrong? Lena had materialized beside him, reading his expression with the accuracy of long friendship. Caleb handed her his phone silently. He watched her face as she read, saw the hope from moments ago drain away and harden into something colder. They're accelerating everything. Her voice was flat. Trying to force this through before we can use whatever evidence you got. That's exactly what they're doing. Caleb took back his phone, already calculating timelines. Chen's smart. She knows Foster defected, probably figured it out when he didn't return to the office this afternoon. So she's trying to outrun the evidence by getting a judge to rule before we can present it. Can they do that? Just demand an emergency hearing? If they claim immediate safety hazards, yes. Judges take that seriously, especially with commercial properties. He was already scrolling through his contacts, looking for the property law specialist Jennifer had mentioned. But it's a risky move. They have to actually prove the hazard exists, and we have permits and city inspections showing the ventilation system is completely safe. Lena leaned against the counter, exhaustion visible in every line of her body. I can't afford an attorney for a court hearing, especially not with 3 days' notice. You won't need one. I'm testifying as your expert witness on the financial and documentary evidence. We just need someone who can handle the procedural aspects and examination. Caleb was already typing an email to Jennifer. And I know people who'll do it pro bono once they see what Sterling's trying to pull. Caleb, you can't keep doing this. You have your own job, your own cases. My cases can wait. This can't. He looked up from his phone. Sterling is betting you'll fold under pressure because you're alone and outmatched. They're wrong on both counts. Sophia appeared from the back room, her child's intuition sensing the shift in mood. Mama, what happened? Lena forced a smile, smoothing her daughter's hair. Just some grown-up business stuff, baby. Nothing for you to worry about. Is it the bad people trying to take our cafe? The directness of the question caught them both off guard. Emma had clearly been sharing details with Sophia, and 8-year-olds were far more perceptive than adults gave them credit for. Yeah, Lena admitted, because lying to Sophia had never worked. But Mr. Turner is helping us fight back. Are you going to win? Sophia looked at Caleb with absolute faith, the kind only children could maintain in the face of adult complexity. I'm going to try my hardest, Caleb said honestly. Sometimes that's all we can do. My mom always wins when she tries her hardest, Sophia declared with the certainty of someone who'd watched Lena rebuild a business from ruins. So you will too. The child's logic was flawless, even if reality was messier. Caleb exchanged a glance with Lena over Sophia's head, seeing his own determination reflected in her expression. His phone rang. Jennifer Chen, responding to his email with characteristic speed. You're taking on Sterling Development in an emergency eviction hearing? Jennifer's voice mixed disbelief with grudging admiration. Caleb, that's insane even for you. I have evidence of deliberate fraud. They're trying to rush to judgment before I can present it. What kind of evidence? Documentation from their own property manager showing they deliberately destroyed lease records to manufacture eviction grounds, plus a pattern of identical behavior across multiple properties. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. You're serious? You actually have that? Completely serious. I need a property attorney who can handle courtroom procedure while I present the forensic evidence. Pro bono, 3 days to prepare. I know someone. Marcus Webb handles tenant rights cases. He's good. He's mean when he needs to be, and he owes me a favor. The sound of typing came through the phone. I'm sending him everything you just told me. Expect a call within the hour. Jennifer, thank you. Don't thank me yet. Sterling plays dirty, and emergency hearings are their home territory. You need to be prepared for them to bring everything they've got. After hanging up, Caleb turned to find both girls watching him expectantly, while Lena pretended to organize clean mugs that were already perfectly organized. That was my colleague, he explained. She's connecting us with an attorney who specializes in exactly this kind of case. He'll call soon to discuss strategy. And if we lose on Thursday? Lena's voice was quiet enough that the girls couldn't hear. Then we appeal and keep fighting, but we're not going to lose. Caleb said it with more confidence than he felt, because sometimes the performance of certainty was as important as the reality. Emma tugged his sleeve. Dad, can Sophia come home with us for dinner? Mom made cookies before she left, and there's like 1 million in the freezer. The casual mention of Vanessa hit harder than Caleb expected, a reminder that his daughter was processing abandonment even while helping celebrate someone else's victory. He looked at Lena questioningly. If it's not too much trouble, she said, I should probably stay here and start documenting everything for the hearing anyway. You need to eat. And Sophia needs dinner that's not cafe pastries. Caleb made the decision quickly. Both of you come over. I'll make pasta, the girls can destroy the kitchen making cookies, and you can use my home office to prepare. I've got a scanner and printer for any documents you need to organize. I don't want to impose... Lena. He waited until she met his eyes. Let people help you. You've been doing everything alone for 6 years. You don't have to anymore. Something shifted in her expression, vulnerability breaking through the defensive self-reliance. Okay, thank you. They caravanned to Caleb's house, the girls riding with Lena and chattering excitedly about cookie recipes. Caleb drove alone, using the quiet to mentally organize the evidence presentation he'd need to deliver in court. 3 days wasn't much time, but he'd worked with less before. His house still felt strange, like a stage set waiting for actors who'd never return. Vanessa's absence was everywhere. In the perfectly arranged throw pillows she'd insisted on, the kitchen towels hung with precise spacing, the family photos on the walls that were now lies. Sorry about the mess, he said automatically as they entered, though the house was immaculate. Lena looked around at the spotless living room, the magazine-worthy kitchen, and raised an eyebrow. If this is messy, I'm terrified to see your definition of clean. Vanessa had standards. The past tense felt deliberate. I'm still figuring out what mine are. He set the girls up with cookie ingredients and strict instructions about cleaning up their chaos, then showed Lena to his home office. The room was pure Caleb. Organized shelves, precisely labeled files, a whiteboard covered in case notes, and timeline calculations. "This is very you," Lena observed, taking in the systematic order. "Everything in its place, nothing left to chance." Control is comforting when the world feels chaotic. Caleb cleared space on his desk, pulling out the flash drive Foster had provided. "Here's what we're working with: emails, work orders, financial records, all pointing to a deliberate pattern of fraud." Lena sat down, and they spent the next hour reviewing documents while sounds of creative destruction drifted from the kitchen. The evidence was damning. Kane's direct orders to the contractor, payment records that coincided exactly with the basement flooding, similar documentation from 3 other properties where mysterious maintenance issues had destroyed tenant records. "This is unbelievable," Lena said, reading an email where Kane explicitly discussed needing to eliminate documentation before proceeding with an eviction. He actually wrote this down, like he didn't think anyone would ever see it. Arrogance. He's been getting away with it long enough that he stopped being careful. Caleb highlighted another section. "But this is our smoking gun. Proof that Sterling Development knew about your approved ventilation system and chose to destroy the evidence rather than honor the existing lease." "So why the emergency hearing? If they know we have this, why not back down?" "Because they're hoping the judge won't allow it as evidence. It came from an employee who technically violated confidentiality agreements by sharing internal documents. Sterling's attorneys will argue it's inadmissible, fruit of the poisonous tree." Lena's face fell. "Can they do that?" "They can try, but Marcus Webb is good. If anyone can get this admitted, it's him." Caleb's phone rang before he could elaborate. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. "This is probably him now." Marcus Webb had the kind of voice that commanded courtrooms, deep, precise, with an undertone of controlled aggression. He wasted no time on pleasantries. "Jennifer sent me the preliminary details. I need everything you've got. Documentation, witness statements, timeline analysis. And I need it tonight." "I can have it compiled within 2 hours," Caleb replied, already mentally organizing the files. "Good. Because Sterling's attorneys are filing supplemental motions claiming your client poses a fire hazard to neighboring businesses. They're trying to paint this as a public safety issue, not a landlord-tenant dispute." "That's complete fabrication?" "The ventilation system has been inspected and approved by the city fire marshal every year for 8 years. "Then we need those inspection reports. Every single one, with official city seals and inspector signatures." Webb's tone was brisk, businesslike. "And I need you prepared to testify as expert witness on the documentary evidence. Sterling will try to discredit you as biased because you're friends with Miss Morales. We need to establish your credentials before they can undermine your testimony. 14 years as a forensic accountant with Morrison and Webb. Testified in 43 fraud cases, never had my expert opinion successfully challenged." "That'll work. Send me your CV along with everything else." Webb paused. "Jennifer says you're good. I'm trusting her judgment." "But Caleb? Sterling Development has deep pockets and attorneys who specialize in intimidation. This won't be pleasant. I've faced down financial criminals who embezzled pension funds and destroyed people's retirement savings. I think I can handle a property developer with a god complex." Webb laughed, sharp and approving. "I think we're going to work well together. Get me those files by midnight. We'll meet tomorrow at my office to prepare examination strategy." After hanging up, Caleb found Lena watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You're really doing this," she said quietly, "taking on Sterling in court, risking your professional reputation, spending every spare moment fighting my battle. It's not just your battle anymore, it's ours." He started organizing files on his computer, creating the comprehensive package Webb had requested. "And honestly, this is what I'm good at. Analyzing evidence, building cases, exposing fraud. Your cafe just happens to be the current battleground. There's more to it than that." Caleb stopped typing, meeting her gaze directly. "You're right. There is. You matter to me, Lena. Your life, your business, your daughter's stability, it all matters. So yeah, I'm invested in this beyond professional interest." The air between them shifted, charged with implications neither was quite ready to address. Emma's laughter from the kitchen broke the moment, a reminder of the girls who depended on both of them staying focused. "I should check on the destruction," Caleb said, standing. Make sure they haven't burned down my kitchen. Caleb? Lena's voice stopped him at the door. Thank you. For all of it. For caring enough to fight. Always. He found the kitchen transformed into a flour-dusted disaster zone, both girls covered in cookie dough and giggling hysterically. The cookies themselves looked questionable, misshapen lumps of various sizes, but the joy on their faces made the mess worthwhile. Dad, look what we made! Emma held up something that might have been intended as a star shape. Sophia showed me how to make them extra chocolatey. I see that. Very creative. Caleb surveyed the damage with the resignation of a parent who'd learned to pick his battles. How about we get these in the oven and start on dinner? I'm thinking pasta with that marinara sauce you both like. The girls cheered, and for the next hour, Caleb's house filled with the kind of comfortable chaos it had been missing for months. Maybe years, if he was honest. Vanessa had run their home like a museum, pristine, controlled, every mess immediately eliminated. This was different. Messy and loud and utterly alive. Lena emerged from the office as dinner finished cooking, lured by the smell of garlic and tomatoes. She'd pulled her hair down from its professional twist, and exhaustion shadowed her eyes despite the determined set of her jaw. Files are compiled, Caleb reported, stirring the pasta. Everything Webb requested organized chronologically with cross-references. I'll send it as soon as we eat. You don't have to do the cooking, too. I could have... Sit down. Let someone take care of you for once. He handed her a glass of wine he'd poured while she was working. You've spent 8 years being the one who handles everything alone. Take a breath. She accepted the wine, sinking into a chair at the kitchen table. The girls had moved their chaos to the living room, building something elaborate with couch cushions and blankets. Their voices provided a comfortable soundtrack. My ex-husband never cooked, Lena said suddenly. Said it wasn't worth his time. That's why we started the cafe originally. It was supposed to be my job to handle the food while he managed the business side. Turned out he was better at embezzlement than management. But Caleb had heard pieces of the story before, but never the complete picture. He kept cooking, giving her space to talk or stay silent as she needed. When he left, everyone told me to sell. That I couldn't run the cafe alone, couldn't raise Sophia and manage a business. That I should cut my losses and find something stable. Lena swirled the wine in her glass. But the cafe was mine, you know? The only thing I'd built that was completely mine, so I bought him out with money I didn't have and figured it out day by day. You did more than figure it out. You turned it into something special. Some days, it doesn't feel special. It feels like drowning slowly while pretending everything's fine. She looked up at him. Other days, like when you and Emma show up with laptop and homework, or when Sophia helps me roast beans, it feels like exactly what I was supposed to build. Does that make sense? Completely. Caleb drained the pasta, the steam rising between them. My marriage felt like that for the past year, drowning slowly while maintaining appearances. I told myself it was normal, that all relationships went through rough patches, but honestly, I was relieved when Vanessa left, relieved to stop pretending. That's a hard thing to admit. Yeah. Especially with Emma processing the abandonment. How do I tell my daughter I'm actually okay with her mother leaving? That our house feels lighter without Vanessa's constant criticism and emotional absence? You tell her the truth, same as you've been doing. That people sometimes choose paths that hurt others, and that hurt is real, but it doesn't mean everything has to stay broken. Lena stood, helping him plate the pasta. And you show her that life continues, that good people stick around and help carry the weight. They called the girls for dinner, and the 4 of them crowded around Caleb's kitchen table in a configuration that felt both foreign and right. Emma and Sophia kept up constant chatter, moving seamlessly between topics only children could connect: school drama, cookie recipes, plans for the blanket fort they were building. Can Sophia sleep over? Emma asked as they cleared plates. Please? We never get to have sleepovers on school nights. Caleb looked at Lena questioningly. She hesitated, clearly calculating the logistics of retrieving Sophia's school clothes and morning routine. I don't want to impose more than we already have, she started. Mom, please? Sophia's pleading expression matched Emma's perfectly. We'll go to bed on time and everything. You won't go to bed on time, Lena said, but she was smiling. But okay. If Mr. Turner doesn't mind the chaos. The chaos is actually nice, Caleb admitted. House has been too quiet lately. The girls disappeared upstairs to construct their sleeping fort, leaving the adults alone with coffee and the weight of Thursday's hearing hanging unspoken between them. I should review those files one more time, Lena said, but she didn't move from the table. Make sure I understand everything in case I need to testify. Marcus will handle most of the questioning. You just need to be honest and let your knowledge of the business speak for itself. Caleb refilled their coffee cups. Sterling's going to try to paint you as careless or negligent. Don't let them. You've run that cafe for 8 years without a single safety violation or customer complaint. The facts are on your side. What if the facts aren't enough? Then we make them enough. We present the evidence so clearly, so systematically, that the judge has no choice but to see Sterling's fraud for what it is. He pulled out his laptop, bringing up the timeline he'd constructed. Look at this. Every property Sterling acquired, same pattern. Mysterious maintenance issues, destroyed records, forced evictions, immediate lease to new tenants at triple the rent. It's not coincidence. It's strategy. Lena studied the timeline, her analytical mind engaging with the data. How did they get away with it for so long? Because their targets were all small business owners without resources to fight back. Solo operators who couldn't afford attorneys or extended legal battles. They take the settlement offer because fighting seemed impossible. But I can fight because I have you. You can fight because you're stubborn and brave and refuse to let bullies win. I'm just providing the ammunition. She looked at him over the laptop screen, and again that charged awareness passed between them. The friendship that had sustained them through parallel struggles was evolving into something neither had planned for, complicated by timing and circumstance and the fact that Caleb's marriage had imploded barely 2 weeks ago. We should focus on Thursday, Lena said finally, breaking the moment. Everything else can wait. Everything else can wait, Caleb agreed, though part of him wondered if waiting was wise or just another form of avoiding truth. They worked until nearly 11, refining their understanding of the evidence, anticipating Sterling's arguments, preparing for every angle of attack Margaret Chen might deploy. The girls had long since fallen asleep upstairs, their voices fading gradually into silence around 9:30. When Lena finally left to drive home, insisting she needed her own bed despite Caleb's offer of the guest room, the house felt emptier than it had in days. Caleb stood in his doorway watching her taillights disappear, same spot where he'd watched Vanessa's cab vanish 2 weeks ago, but the emotions couldn't have been more different. Vanessa leaving had felt like amputation, painful but ultimately necessary, removing something that had already died. Lena leaving felt like temporary absence, like she'd be back because she chose to be, not because obligation trapped her. The difference mattered more than Caleb wanted to examine right now. He checked on the girls before heading to his own room. They were tangled together in Emma's bed, the elaborate fort abandoned for simple proximity. Sophia had her arm thrown over Emma protectively, and Emma clutched Sophia's hand even in sleep. Whatever else happened, whatever outcome Thursday brought, these two would be okay. They had each other, and they had adults who were willing to fight for their stability. Sometimes that was enough. Caleb worked past midnight, sending files to Marcus Webb and refining his expert testimony notes. His phone buzzed at 12:40 with Webb's response. Received. Excellent work. See you at 9 a.m. to prepare examination. He finally allowed himself to sleep around 1, mind still churning through evidence chains and courtroom strategies. Tomorrow would be intense preparation. Thursday would be battle day. And somewhere beyond that was a future he was only beginning to imagine, where broken families rebuilt into something different, but possibly stronger. The next morning arrived too quickly. Caleb dropped both girls at school, fielding Emma's excited questions about the hearing while Sophia stayed quiet and thoughtful. At his office, he tied up loose ends on other cases, delegating what he could to colleagues who asked pointed questions about his sudden obsession with property law. This isn't your normal territory, Jennifer observed, cornering him in the break room. Fraud investigation, sure, but fighting evictions? What's really going on? A friend needs help. Lena Morales, the cafe owner. Jennifer's expression was knowing. How long have you two been more than friends? We haven't, it's complicated. Caleb struggled to articulate something he hadn't fully processed himself. She's been my closest friend for 5 years. We're both single parents, both rebuilding after bad marriages. The friendship works because it's uncomplicated. Except now it's very complicated, and you're taking on a major developer to protect her business. Jennifer sipped her coffee, watching him carefully. Caleb, I've known you for 6 years. I've never seen you this invested in anything outside your casework. Whatever this is, it matters to you. Yeah, it does. Then win. Because if you lose, it won't just be her cafe that's gone. It'll damage whatever this thing between you is becoming. The observation followed Caleb to his 9 a.m. meeting with Marcus Webb. The attorney's office occupied a renovated warehouse in Pioneer Square, all exposed brick and industrial chic that somehow felt both expensive and accessible. Webb himself was mid-40s, African-American, with the kind of sharp-eyed intelligence that missed nothing. He shook Caleb's hand with a grip that tested strength and commitment simultaneously. Your evidence package is excellent, Webb said without preamble, gesturing Caleb to a chair. Organized, cross-referenced, timeline clear. You've done half my job already. 14 years of fraud investigation teaches you to present information clearly. I've reviewed your CV and case history. Impressive record. Sterling's attorneys will try to discredit you anyway, claim bias because of your relationship with Miss Morales. How do we handle that? By acknowledging the friendship openly. Yes, Lena Morales is my friend. That's exactly why I examined the evidence so carefully, because I knew Sterling would assume bias and look for any weakness in my analysis. Everything I present is documented, cross-referenced, and verifiable through independent sources. Webb smiled approvingly. Good. Own the relationship. Use it as motivation for thoroughness rather than liability. I like it. He pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. Now walk me through the foster documents. How did you acquire them, and can we authenticate them in court? They spent the next 3 hours in intense preparation. Webb played aggressive defense attorney, attacking every aspect of Caleb's testimony, probing for weaknesses in his analysis, forcing him to defend conclusions under hostile examination. It was exhausting and essential, the kind of preparation that meant the difference between effective testimony and demolished credibility. You're good at this, Webb observed during a brief break. Most expert witnesses get defensive under pressure. You stay analytical, stick to facts. Getting defensive means you're reacting emotionally instead of logically. Fraud cases taught me to separate personal feelings from evidence presentation. Can you do that tomorrow? Separate personal feelings from the fact that this case directly impacts someone you care about. Caleb considered the question honestly. I don't know, but I know how to appear like I'm separating them, which is sometimes enough. Fair answer. Webb checked his watch. We should bring in Ms. Morales for the afternoon session. I need to prepare her testimony, and she needs to see how aggressive Sterling's examination will be. Lena arrived at 2, looking professional in a navy dress and blazer that Caleb had never seen her wear. She'd pulled her hair back severely, and the effect was polished but somehow diminished, like she was trying to shrink herself to fit courtroom expectations. You look terrified, Webb said bluntly. That's normal. By the time we're done today, you'll be prepared enough that the terror becomes manageable. He wasn't gentle in his preparation. For 2 hours, Webb hammered at Lena's testimony, playing Margaret Chen's aggressive questioning style, probing for inconsistencies in her story, trying to shake her composure. Caleb watched her struggle initially, then gradually find her footing as she realized that honesty and directness were more powerful than trying to anticipate trick questions. Why didn't you keep backup copies of the ventilation approval documentation? Webb demanded, channeling Chen's likely attack. Because I trusted that official city permits and the landlord's letter were sufficient. The documents were stored in the building's record room where they'd been for 8 years. I had no reason to believe they'd be deliberately destroyed. But you were careless in protecting your business interests. No, I was operating under the reasonable assumption that property owners don't commit fraud. Apparently that assumption was wrong. Webb broke character, smiling. Good. Stay exactly that direct. Don't get defensive. Don't over-explain. Just answer the question asked and trust that the facts support you. By 5 o'clock, they'd covered every angle of potential examination. Lena looked exhausted but more confident, and Webb seemed satisfied with her preparation. Tomorrow's going to be intense, he warned as they prepared to leave. Sterling will bring everything they have, aggressive attorneys, fabricated safety reports, character assassination attempts. They'll try to make Miss Morales look negligent and you look biased. Our job is to stay calm, present facts, and let their desperation show through. And if the judge rules against us, Lena asked, then we appeal and keep fighting. But I've read the evidence. Sterling's case is built on lies and destroyed documents. We have city permits, expert testimony, and proof of their fraud pattern. Any reasonable judge will see through their tactics. Any reasonable judge is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, Caleb observed. True, which is why we prepare for unreasonable possibilities while hoping for justice. Webb gathered his files. Get some sleep tonight, both of you. You need to be sharp tomorrow. They left together, stepping out into the late afternoon sunlight. Seattle's downtown bustled around them, oblivious to the battle being waged in conference rooms and legal briefs. Want to grab dinner? Caleb asked. Debrief and make sure we're both ready for tomorrow? I should get home to Sophia. Her grandmother's watching her, but I don't want to impose too long. Lena hesitated. But thank you, for today, for yesterday, for all of it. We're going to win this, Caleb said with more certainty than he felt. Sterling's counting on intimidation and legal complexity. They're not counting on you being willing to fight or me being good at my job. I hope you're right. I'm always right. Ask anyone who's worked with me. He smiled, trying to ease the tension visible in her shoulders. Okay, that's a lie. I'm right about 70% of the time, but I'm right about this. They parted ways in the parking garage, and Caleb drove home alone with his thoughts. Tomorrow would determine whether weeks of investigation and preparation were enough to overcome corporate power and legal maneuvering, whether the evidence he'd assembled could survive courtroom scrutiny and aggressive defense tactics, whether showing up and fighting back actually mattered in a system designed to favor money and influence. Emma was at soccer practice, giving him a quiet house to review his testimony notes one final time. He spread everything across his dining room table, walking through each piece of evidence, anticipating questions, preparing responses. His phone buzzed with the text from Lena. Thank you for believing this was worth fighting for. Whatever happens tomorrow, that matters. Caleb typed back. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we show Sterling what happens when they pick on the wrong cafe. He meant it. Whatever outcome Thursday brought, Sterling Development would learn that some people fought back, that not every small business owner could be bullied into submission, that sometimes the evidence actually mattered more than expensive attorneys and manufactured crises. And if they lost anyway, at least they'd lose knowing they'd given everything they had to the fight. Sometimes that was the only victory available. Thursday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of perfect Seattle weather that felt like mockery when facing courtroom battles. Caleb stood in front of his bathroom mirror at 6 a.m., tying his tie with mechanical precision while his mind rehearsed testimony sequences and evidence chains. Navy suit again. The armor of credibility. Emma appeared in the doorway, still in pajamas, her hair wild from sleep. You're up early. Big day. Caleb adjusted his collar, meeting his daughter's eyes in the mirror. The hearing is at 10. Should be done by early afternoon. Are you nervous? Focused, he said again, the same answer he'd given 3 days ago. But this time Emma's expression called him on the deflection. Dad, you can tell me the truth. I'm not a baby. Caleb turned from the mirror, kneeling to her level. Yeah, I'm nervous. The evidence is solid, but courtrooms are unpredictable. Good people with strong cases lose sometimes because judges make bad calls or opposing attorneys are more persuasive than they should be. But you're really good at your job. I am, and Marcus Webb is excellent at his, and Lena deserves to win. He squeezed Emma's shoulder, but I can't guarantee the outcome, and that makes me nervous. Emma hugged him suddenly, fierce and tight. Lena needs you to win. We need her cafe to stay. The weight of her faith pressed against Caleb's chest. I know, sweetheart. I'm going to do everything I can. He made Emma breakfast, got her ready for school, and dropped her off with strict instructions to focus on her classwork instead of worrying about things she couldn't control. Then he drove to Marcus Webb's office, arriving 45 minutes early for their final preparation session. Webb was already there, reviewing case law, and drinking what smelled like his fourth coffee of the morning. You look ready. As ready as I can be. Caleb set down his briefcase, pulling out the organized evidence files. Any last-minute strategy changes? Sterling filed a motion at 8 p.m. last night trying to exclude Foster's documents as stolen property obtained through corporate espionage. Judge Morrison denied it an hour ago, but expect Chen to keep hammering on the authenticity question during cross-examination. The documents are authenticated through metadata, email headers, and cross-reference with Sterling's own public filings. She can question how we obtained them, but she can't dispute their legitimacy. She'll try anyway. Morrison's a stickler for procedure, which works for us since Sterling's rushing this hearing. But he's also influenced by presentation confidence. We need to project absolute certainty in our evidence while Sterling scrambles to justify their fabricated safety claims. Lena arrived at 9:15, wearing the same navy dress from yesterday, but looking like she'd slept even less than Caleb. Her hand shook slightly as she set down her purse, and her eyes carried the haunted expression of someone who'd spent the night imagining worst-case scenarios. "Hey," Caleb said quietly, catching her before Webb could launch into final instructions. "How are you holding up?" "I threw up twice this morning. Sophia asked if I was sick, and I had to explain that sometimes fear makes your body do weird things." Lena's laugh was shaky. "Mother of the Year material right there." "You told her the truth. That's always the right choice." He wanted to take her hand, offer some physical reassurance, but the professional distance felt important to maintain. "Today's going to be hard, but you've prepared for every question they could ask. Just stay honest and let the facts speak." "What if honest isn't enough?" "Then we appeal and keep fighting." "But Lena?" "I've seen the evidence. I've reviewed Sterling's case. They're banking on intimidation because their actual legal standing is garbage. Trust the preparation." Webb interrupted with final tactical instructions, walking them both through the hearing's likely sequence. Sterling would present their emergency safety claims first, trying to establish immediate hazard. Marcus would cross-examine their expert, exposing weaknesses in the fabricated report. Then Lena would testify about the cafe's history and the original ventilation approval. Finally, Caleb would present the documentary evidence showing Sterling's fraud pattern. "The key moment," Webb emphasized, "is when we introduce Foster's emails. Sterling will object strenuously. Morrison will likely allow them, but instruct the court to weigh them carefully given the source. That's when Caleb needs to demonstrate that the emails corroborate independently verifiable facts, not stand alone as evidence." "I've cross-referenced every claim in Foster's documents with public records, building permits, and property transfer files," Caleb confirmed. "The emails just make explicit what the paper trail already shows." "Perfect. Let's go win this." The King County Courthouse was a monument to civic authority, all marble columns and brass fixtures designed to remind visitors that the law carried weight and consequence. Caleb had testified here dozens of times in fraud cases, comfortable in the formal atmosphere. But watching Lena's anxiety spike as they passed through security reminded him that courtrooms felt very different when your entire livelihood was on trial. They found courtroom 4C on the 3rd floor, a smaller hearing room without the jury box of criminal courts. Judge Robert Morrison presided from an elevated bench, 50-something with silver hair and the kind of stern expression that suggested he had limited patience for legal games. Sterling Development had brought an army. Margaret Chen sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 2 junior attorneys and Victor Kane himself, who radiated expensive confidence in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Lena's monthly rent. Behind them sat a man Caleb didn't recognize, mid-40s, carrying a leather portfolio marked with an engineering firm's logo, the fabricated expert witness. "That's their structural engineer," Webb murmured as they took their seats. "Dr. Richard Paulson works for Cascade Engineering Consultants. Legitimate credentials, but he does a lot of work for property developers. Knows which way his bread is buttered." The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Morrison surveyed both tables with the expression of someone who'd already read all the filings and wasn't impressed by either side's dramatics. "This is an emergency hearing regarding alleged lease violations and safety hazards at commercial property. 447 Harbor Avenue," Morrison began, his voice carrying natural authority. "I've reviewed the preliminary motions and evidence submissions. Ms. Chen, you're claiming immediate safety hazards requiring emergency eviction. Present your case." Margaret Chen stood with the fluid confidence of someone who'd won more courtroom battles than she'd lost. "Your Honor, Sterling Development acquired the Harbor Avenue property 6 months ago with a responsibility to maintain safe conditions for all tenants and neighboring businesses. Subsequent inspection revealed that Miss Morales' cafe has installed an industrial ventilation system without proper approval, creating significant fire hazards and code violations that pose immediate danger. She gestured to Dr. Paulson. We've brought structural engineering expert Dr. Richard Paulson to testify about the specific safety concerns and immediate risk to public welfare. Morrison nodded to Paulson, who took the witness stand with practiced ease. The bailiff swore him in, and Chen began her examination with surgical precision. Dr. Paulson, you conducted an inspection of the ventilation system at Morales Roasters on Monday of this week, correct? Yes, I performed a comprehensive structural and safety analysis of the commercial kitchen ventilation installation. And what did you find? Paulson consulted his report, though Caleb suspected he'd memorized the key points. The system presents multiple code violations. The ventilation hood extends beyond approved load-bearing capacity for that building's age and construction. The ductwork penetrates fire-rated walls without proper dampers. The exhaust outlet creates heat concentration that could ignite adjacent structures. It was comprehensive, technical, and complete fabrication. Caleb watched Lena's face pale as the supposed expert cataloged dangers that didn't exist. In your professional opinion, Chen continued, does this system pose immediate danger requiring emergency remediation? Absolutely. Every day that system operates increases the risk of catastrophic fire. I would classify this as an urgent safety hazard requiring immediate shutdown and removal. Thank you, Dr. Paulson. Chen returned to her seat with the satisfied expression of someone who just delivered a knockout blow. Morrison turned to Webb. Cross-examination? Webb stood slowly, projecting the casual confidence of someone about to dismantle an opponent's case brick by brick. Dr. Paulson, when exactly did you conduct this inspection? Monday, August 7th, beginning at 2 p.m. And how long did this comprehensive structural and safety analysis take? Approximately 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Webb let that hang in the air. To assess structural load capacity, examine fire-rated wall penetrations, measure heat concentrations, and produce a 15-page report with detailed engineering calculations. That's remarkably efficient. Paulson shifted slightly. I'm experienced in rapid assessment protocols. I'm sure you are. Tell me, Doctor. Paulson, did you bring measurement equipment to conduct this inspection? Standard assessment tools, tape measure, level, thermal imaging camera. Did you conduct load-bearing calculations? Visual assessment based on structural age and construction type. So no actual engineering calculations, no stress tests, no materials analysis. Webb moved closer to the witness stand. Did you review the original building plans to determine approved load capacity? The building is 90 years old. Original plans are unavailable. Actually, they're not. Webb pulled a document from his file. The 1934 building plans are archived with the city's Historical Preservation Office. I have them here. Did you review these plans before declaring the ventilation system exceeds load capacity? Paulson's pause was barely noticeable, but Caleb caught it. Those plans weren't provided to me. Did you request them? I worked with the documentation Sterling Development provided, which didn't include original building plans, construction permits, or any of the historical documentation that would be essential for accurate structural assessment. Webb let that settle before continuing. Dr. Paulson, you mentioned fire-rated walls. Did you verify that the walls in question are actually fire-rated according to current building codes? Based on the building's commercial designation. That's not what I asked. Did you verify, through actual inspection or documentation review, that those specific walls carry fire rating requirements? Not specifically, no. So your conclusion that the ductwork violates fire-rated wall standards is based on assumption, not verified fact. It's based on standard commercial building practices, which may or may not apply to a 90-year-old structure with grandfathered code exceptions. No further questions, Your Honor. Paulson left the witness stand looking less confident than when he'd arrived. Morrison made notes, his expression unreadable. Chen called David Foster next, clearly hoping to discredit him before the defense could use his testimony. Foster took the stand looking nervous but determined, and Caleb felt a flicker of respect for the young property manager who'd chosen conscience over career. Mr. Foster, Chen began, her tone sharp, you were employed by Sterling Development until 3 days ago, correct? I resigned on Tuesday. After stealing confidential company documents and providing them to the opposing party in active litigation, Webb objected immediately. Counsel is testifying rather than questioning, Your Honor. Sustained. Ms. Chen, please phrase questions appropriately. Chen didn't miss a beat. Mr. Foster, did you provide internal Sterling development documents to Mr. Turner without authorization? I provided documentation of fraudulent activities that I believed were being covered up by Sterling Development. So you violated your confidentiality agreement and employment contract. I exposed criminal fraud. That's not for you to determine, is it? You're not an attorney or law enforcement officer. Chen moved in for the kill. You're a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind, providing questionable documents to support a tenant you sympathize with. I'm someone who couldn't participate in destroying people's businesses anymore. Foster's voice was steady despite the attack. I watched Sterling Development force out 3 other tenants using the exact same tactics they're using against Ms. Morales. Fabricated violations, destroyed documents, pressure tactics. I couldn't be part of it anymore. No further questions. Chen dismissed him with visible contempt, but Caleb noted that Morrison was watching Foster with interest rather than skepticism. Webb called Lena next, and Caleb watched her walk to the witness stand with her shoulders squared and her hands steady. Whatever terror she'd felt that morning had crystallized into determined composure. Webb walked her through the cafe's history methodically, the original lease negotiation with Martin Reeves, the ventilation system approval process, the permits and inspections she'd obtained. Lena's answers were direct and factual, painting a picture of a responsible business owner who'd followed every rule and documented everything properly. Ms. Morales, Webb said, when did you first learn that Sterling Development claimed your ventilation approval didn't exist? When they sent the eviction notice 3 weeks ago. I was shocked because I had the original approval letter from Mr. Reeves and all the city permits. Did you provide those documents to Sterling? Immediately. I sent copies of everything. Reeves' letter, the permits, the inspection reports. Everything proving the system was properly approved. And how did Sterling respond? They claimed the documents weren't sufficient without corresponding records in their files. Said the basement flooding had destroyed the building's documentation, and without that, they couldn't verify the approval. Webb nodded sympathetically. But the city permit still existed, correct? Independent verification that the ventilation system met all code requirements? Yes. The fire marshal inspects it every year. We've never had a single violation or concern raised. Thank you, Ms. Morales. Webb returned to his seat, and Chen stood for cross-examination with predatory focus. Ms. Morales, you built this ventilation system 8 years ago. Surely you knew that maintaining documentation of such a major improvement was critical to protecting your business interests. I kept the approval letter and all the permits, but you didn't keep backup copies, didn't store duplicates off-site, didn't take any precautions to protect yourself if the building's records were lost or damaged. I trusted that the official city permits and the landlord's approval were sufficient. That's standard practice. Standard practice for someone careless about protecting their business. Chen's tone was cutting. You gambled that nothing would happen to the building's records, and now you're asking this court to penalize Sterling Development for your poor planning. I'm asking the court to recognize that Sterling Development deliberately destroyed evidence to manufacture grounds for eviction. That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof that Sterling deliberately destroyed anything? Lena met Chen's eyes directly. Not personally, but Mr. Turner has documented evidence of exactly that pattern. Mr. Turner, who is your close personal friend and has obvious bias in this case. Mr. Turner, who is a forensic accountant with 14 years of experience exposing fraud. His friendship with me doesn't change the facts of what Sterling Development has done. Morrison interrupted before Chen could continue. Ms. Chen will evaluate Mr. Turner's testimony on its merits. Move on. Chen tried several more angles of attack, but Lena held firm, answering questions directly without getting defensive or over-explaining. By the time she left the witness stand, Caleb felt cautiously optimistic that her testimony had been effective. Then Morrison called a 15-minute recess, and the waiting became almost unbearable. They regrouped in a small conference room down the hall. Webb was pleased with how the morning had gone, but cautioned that everything depended on Caleb's testimony surviving Chen's cross-examination. She's going to attack your relationship with Lena, question your objectivity, try to paint you as someone conducting a vendetta rather than legitimate investigation. Webb fixed Caleb with a serious look. You need to stay completely professional. No emotion, no defensiveness. Just facts and analysis. I understand. Do you? Because I've seen expert witnesses with better credentials than you get destroyed on the stand when opposing counsel hits their emotional triggers. Chen is very good at finding those triggers. Caleb thought about Vanessa leaving, about Emma asking if they could keep the cafe, about Lena's terror that morning. I can separate the personal from the professional. It's what I do. We'll see. When they returned to the courtroom, Morrison called Caleb to the witness stand. The oath felt heavier than usual, the weight of everything riding on his testimony pressing against his chest. He settled into the witness chair, meeting the judge's evaluating gaze with practiced calm. Webb began with foundation questions, establishing Caleb's credentials and experience. 14 years at Morrison and Webb, 43 fraud cases, expertise in financial document analysis and pattern recognition. The resume was impressive enough that even Chen didn't bother challenging his qualifications. Mr. Turner, Webb continued, you conducted an investigation into Sterling Development's acquisition and management of the Harbor Avenue property. What did that investigation reveal? Caleb had rehearsed this moment countless times, but actually delivering the testimony felt different, more consequential. I identified a clear pattern of behavior across multiple properties Sterling has acquired. In each case, the company purchased buildings with existing below-market leases, then forced out those tenants using fabricated lease violations and destroyed documentation. Can you provide specific examples? In March of this year, Sterling acquired a property on Pine Street housing a bookstore. Within 6 weeks, they claimed the bookstore's signage violated building codes and demanded removal. When the owner produced the original landlord's approval, Sterling stated those records had been lost during ownership transfer. The bookstore owner couldn't afford to fight and accepted a settlement of $18,000. Sterling then leased the space to a tech company at 4 times the previous rent. Caleb walked through 2 more examples, each following the same pattern. Webb introduced the supporting documentation, public records, news articles, court filings, that corroborated every claim. And in Ms. Morales' case, Webb prompted, the pattern is identical. Sterling acquired the building, claimed the ventilation approval doesn't exist in their records, cited a convenient basement flood that destroyed documentation, and offered a lowball settlement clearly designed to pressure Ms. Morales into accepting rather than fighting. But you found evidence that the documentation did exist, and Sterling had access to it. Yes, the probate records from Martin Reeves' estate show a complete property disclosure package was provided to Sterling Development 6 weeks before the sale closed. That package included a schedule of tenant improvements, specifically listing Ms. Morales' ventilation system as approved, while Webb entered the probate records into evidence, and Caleb explained the significance of each document with methodical precision. Then came the moment they'd been building toward. Mr. Turner, you also obtained internal Sterling Development documents. How did you acquire those? They were provided by David Foster, Sterling's former property manager, who became concerned about the company's business practices. And what do those documents show? Caleb pulled out the flash drive's printed contents, organized into clear categories. Email correspondence between Victor Kane and maintenance contractors, explicitly discussing the need to damage building infrastructure to eliminate problematic documentation. Work orders authorizing contractors to access basement storage areas with no legitimate maintenance purpose. Financial records showing payments to those contractors that coincide exactly with the timing of the basement flooding and other mysterious maintenance issues. He walked through specific emails, reading Kane's own words directing the destruction of tenant records. The courtroom was silent, except for Caleb's voice, each piece of evidence landing with cumulative impact. In your professional opinion as a forensic accountant, Webb asked, does this documentation demonstrate a pattern of deliberate fraud? Absolutely. The evidence shows systematic, intentional destruction of documentation to facilitate tenant displacement. It's not coincidence or accident, it's corporate strategy. Thank you, Mr. Turner. Webb sat down, and Margaret Chen rose with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment. Mr. Turner, you and Mrs. Morales are close friends, correct? Yes. How close? You spend significant time together. Your daughters are best friends. You've described her as the person who stood with you during your recent divorce. We've been friends for 5 years. Our relationship is supportive and important to both of us. So when Sterling Development threatened to evict your close friend, you took it personally. I took it seriously. There's a difference. Is there? You've spent hundreds of hours investigating Sterling Development, assembled evidence with the kind of obsessive detail usually reserved for personal vendettas, and now you're testifying against them in court. That seems quite personal, Mr. Turner. My investigation was thorough because I knew Sterling would claim exactly what you're claiming now, that bias compromised my analysis. Every conclusion I've presented is based on documented evidence, cross-referenced with independent sources, and verifiable through public records. My friendship with Miss Morales motivated me to be more careful, not less. Chen smiled thinly. How convenient. And these internal documents you obtained from Mr. Foster, a disgruntled employee who violated his employment contract and confidentiality agreements, you never questioned their authenticity? I verified their authenticity through metadata analysis, email header examination, and cross-reference with Sterling's own public communications. The documents are genuine, or very sophisticated forgeries created by someone with access to internal systems and a motivation to damage Sterling Development's reputation. The emails reference specific dates, times, and transactions that correlate exactly with publicly documented events. Unless Mr. Foster somehow fabricated an entire alternate timeline that coincidentally matches independent records, the documents are authentic. You're very defensive for someone claiming objectivity, Mr. Turner. I'm being precise. There's a difference between defensiveness and refusing to let you mischaracterize evidence. Morrison interrupted before Chen could respond. Ms. Chen, do you have questions about the actual evidence, or are we going to continue debating Mr. Turner's tone? Your Honor, I'm establishing that this witness has personal bias that compromises his testimony's reliability. You've made that point. Move on or conclude your cross-examination. Chen tried several more angles, attacking the chain of custody for Foster's documents, questioning Caleb's interpretation of financial records, suggesting alternative explanations for the pattern he'd identified. But Caleb held firm, answering each question with the same methodical precision he'd brought to countless hostile depositions. Finally, she dismissed him with visible frustration. No further questions. Caleb returned to the defense table feeling drained but satisfied. He'd delivered everything they needed, survived Chen's attacks, and put Sterling's fraud on the record. Now it was up to Morrison to decide whether evidence mattered more than corporate power. Webb delivered a brief closing argument, summarizing the pattern of fraud and the strength of documentation supporting Lena's case. Chen countered with passionate defense of Sterling's good-faith business practices and repeated attacks on the reliability of Foster's documents. Then Morrison announced he'd issue a written ruling within 24 hours, and the hearing was over. They filed out of the courtroom in silence, the weight of waiting settling over all of them. In the hallway outside, Lena finally spoke. How do you think it went? Better than I hoped, Webb said honestly. Morrison asked good questions, caught Chen's overreach several times, and seemed genuinely interested in the fraud evidence. But he's cautious. Could go either way. So we just wait. We wait. Webb gathered his files. I'll call you as soon as the ruling comes through. Try to get some rest. You've both done everything you could. Lena and Caleb walked to the parking garage together, neither speaking until they reached their cars parked side by side. Thank you, Lena said quietly, for everything you did in there. The way you stood up to Chen, defended the evidence, never wavered. That's the job. Present facts, survive cross-examination, trust that the truth matters. It's more than the job, Caleb. You didn't have to do any of this. He looked at her across the space between their cars, this woman who'd become so central to his life without him quite realizing when it happened. Yeah, I did. Because walking away would have meant letting Sterling win, and I really hate it when bullies win. Is that the only reason? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither had fully addressed. Caleb could deflect, make it about justice and principle and professional obligation. But standing in that parking garage with the courtroom battle behind them and an uncertain future ahead, deflection felt like cowardice. No, he admitted. It's not the only reason. You matter to me, Lena. Your cafe, your life, Sophia's stability, all of it matters in ways that go beyond friendship. Caleb, I know the timing is terrible. I'm barely 2 weeks out from Vanessa leaving, still figuring out how to be a single parent, not exactly in a position to complicate either of our lives more than they already are. He ran his hand through his hair, frustrated by his own inability to articulate what he felt. But I can't keep pretending this is just about helping a friend or fighting corporate fraud. Somewhere along the way, you became the person I think about when I wake up and the voice I want to hear before I sleep. And I needed you to know that, even if the timing makes it impossible to do anything about it. Lena was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she crossed the space between them and kissed him, fierce and brief and utterly honest. The timing is terrible, she agreed, pulling back, but we're both terrible at waiting for perfect moments. So maybe terrible timing is exactly right for us. Caleb laughed despite everything, some of the tension breaking. Is this the worst decision we've ever made? Probably, but I'm tired of making safe decisions that lead to empty marriages and slow suffocation. She stepped back, creating space again. Morrison's ruling comes tomorrow. Can we table this conversation until we know whether I still have a business to run? Yeah, we can do that. They separated to their own cars, but something had fundamentally shifted between them. The friendship that had sustained them through parallel struggles had finally acknowledged it was evolving into something neither had planned but both recognized. Caleb drove home feeling strangely lighter despite the uncertainty. Tomorrow would bring Morrison's ruling, and with it either validation or devastation. But whatever came, he wouldn't face it alone. And neither would Lena. That had to count for something. Emma was waiting on the front steps when Caleb pulled into the driveway, still in her soccer uniform with grass stains on her knees and anxiety written across her face. She'd clearly been watching for his car, and the moment he stepped out, she was running toward him with questions tumbling out too fast to answer. How did it go? Did you win? Is Lena okay? Can she keep the cafe? Caleb caught his daughter, steadying her with hands on her shoulders. The hearing went as well as it could. The judge will give us his decision tomorrow. Tomorrow? That's so long. 24 hours. We can manage 24 hours. He guided her toward the house, noting the way her hands were shaking slightly. How was school? I couldn't concentrate. Sophia was crying at lunch because she's scared they're going to lose everything. Emma's voice cracked. Dad, what happens if they lose? Where will they go? The question hit harder than Caleb expected. He'd been so focused on winning the legal battle that he hadn't fully considered the practical devastation of losing. Lena would have to find new commercial space, rebuild her business from scratch, with resources already depleted by legal costs. Sophia would lose the cafe that had been her second home since she was born. They won't be alone, Caleb said firmly. Whatever happens, we'll help them figure it out. That's what families do. Are we family? Me and you and Lena and Sophia? The question was so direct, so hopeful, that Caleb had to pause in the doorway. Yeah, Em, I think we are. Maybe not in the traditional way, but in the way that matters. Emma nodded, satisfied with that answer, and disappeared upstairs to change out of her soccer gear. Caleb stood in his empty kitchen, the house quiet around him, and let himself feel the full weight of what tomorrow's ruling would mean. If Morrison sided with Sterling, they'd appeal, fight through higher courts, drag the battle out for months. But appeals took time and money, and Lena would be evicted long before any appellate ruling came through. They could win eventually and still lose everything that mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from Lena. Cafes closed early. Can't focus on customers when I'm checking my phone every 30 seconds, waiting for a ruling that won't come until tomorrow. Caleb typed back, Want company? I can bring dinner and distraction. The response came immediately, Yes, please. Sophia's with her grandmother overnight, and this house is too quiet for the thoughts in my head. He ordered Thai food from the place Lena liked, picked it up on the way, and found her sitting on her front porch watching the evening light fade over the suburban street. She'd changed from her court clothes into jeans and an old Morales Roasters t-shirt, hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked younger and more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. Comfort food, Caleb announced, holding up the takeout bag. And terrible distraction in the form of my company. Your company is never terrible. Lena stood, managing a small smile. Come in? Fair warning, I've been pacing for 2 hours and wearing a path in my carpet. Her house was the mirror image of his architecturally, but the interior couldn't have been more different. Where Vanessa had insisted on neutral perfection, Lena's home was warm chaos. Sophia's artwork covering walls, mismatched furniture that prioritized comfort over coordination, shelves overflowing with books and coffee samples, and family photos documenting 8 years of determined survival. They ate at her kitchen table, neither particularly hungry, but going through the motions because it gave their hands something to do. The conversation stayed carefully away from the hearing and tomorrow's ruling, circling instead around Emma's soccer season and Sophia's upcoming school play, and the new coffee blend Lena had been developing before Sterling's eviction notice derailed everything. I keep thinking about what I'll do if we lose, Lena admitted finally, pushing pad thai around her plate. Start over somewhere smaller, maybe outside the city where rent is cheaper. But that space, that building, I roasted my first batch of beans there. Sophia took her first steps in the back room. Every regular customer, every morning rush, every quiet afternoon when it was just me and the espresso machine. 8 years of my life are built into those walls. I know. Caleb reached across the table, taking her hand. But if the worst happens, you rebuild. You've done it before. That was different. I was younger, angrier, desperate to prove my ex-husband wrong about me being unable to succeed alone. This time, I'm just tired, Caleb. Tired of fighting, tired of starting over, tired of uncertainty. Then don't face it alone. Whatever tomorrow brings, whatever rebuilding needs to happen, you've got people who'll stand with you. He squeezed her hand gently. Me, Emma, Marcus Webb, the customers who've been calling you all week offering support, you're not isolated anymore. When did you become an optimist? I thought forensic accountants were professionally cynical. We are. But I've also spent 2 weeks watching you refuse to surrender to people who assumed you'd fold immediately. That kind of stubborn courage is contagious. Lena laughed despite everything, and some of the tension eased from her shoulders. They moved to the living room, ostensibly to watch a movie, but actually to sit together in companionable silence while both their minds spun through tomorrow's possibilities. Can I ask you something? Lena said during a scene neither was actually watching. What you said in the parking garage today, about timing being terrible, but maybe that's right for us. Did you mean it? Caleb had been waiting for this conversation since they'd separated that afternoon, knowing it was coming, but still unprepared for the vulnerability it required. Yeah, I meant it. Your wife left 3 weeks ago. My wife emotionally left over a year ago, maybe longer. The physical departure was just making visible what had already happened. He turned to face her directly. I know how it looks from the outside. Marriage collapses, suddenly I'm confessing feelings for my closest friend. Classic rebound situation. Is it? A rebound? No. Because this started before Vanessa left, I just wasn't letting myself acknowledge it. All those afternoons working at your cafe, the conversations that went deeper than friendship usually allows, the way Emma lit up around you and Sophia. I was building a life that centered around you without admitting that's what I was doing. Lena was quiet, processing his words. I told myself it was just friendship too. Safe, uncomplicated. Exactly what I needed after my ex-husband destroyed my ability to trust romantic relationships. But somewhere along the way, you became the person I wanted to tell everything to, the opinion that mattered most, the presence I counted on. So what do we do about it? I don't know. Wait until the ruling comes through and we know whether my business still exists? She smiled wryly. Hard to start a relationship when you might be homeless and bankrupt tomorrow. Then we wait. But Lena, whatever Morrison decides, it doesn't change what I said. You matter to me. That's not contingent on the cafe surviving. She kissed him then, longer and deeper than the parking garage moment, and Caleb felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for longer than he'd realized. This was different from what he'd had with Vanessa. No performance, no carefully maintained facade, just honest connection between two people who'd survived enough to know what actually mattered. They pulled apart reluctantly, and Lena rested her forehead against his. Terrible timing. The worst. But maybe exactly right anyway. Yeah, maybe it is. Caleb stayed until nearly midnight, neither wanting to separate but both knowing that tomorrow required them to be sharp and prepared for whatever came. When he finally drove home, the house felt less empty than it had in weeks, filled with possibility instead of absence. Emma was long asleep, but he checked on her anyway, watching his daughter's peaceful face and feeling grateful that whatever else changed, she had stability and people who loved her. That had to be enough. The waiting stretched through Friday morning like taffy, each hour feeling longer than the last. Caleb tried to focus on work, reviewing cases and preparing depositions, but his attention kept fracturing toward his phone and the ruling that would determine so much. Marcus Webb called at 11 with a status update. Morrison's clerk says the ruling will be delivered by close of business today. Could be noon, could be 5 p.m. No way to predict. How are you feeling about our chances? Cautiously optimistic. Morrison asked smart questions, seemed skeptical of Sterling's fabricated safety claims, and didn't shut down the fraud evidence, despite Chen's objections. But he's also a conservative jurist who doesn't like ruling against established corporations without ironclad proof. We have ironclad proof. We have David Foster's documents, which Sterling's attorneys spent considerable energy trying to discredit. Morrison has to decide whether to believe a defector's evidence or give Sterling the benefit of doubt. Webb paused. I've been doing this 20 years, Caleb. I still can't predict with certainty how judges will rule. We wait and hope the evidence speaks loud enough. The afternoon crawled past with excruciating slowness. Caleb picked up Emma from school, brought her to the cafe where Lena was pretending to work while actually refreshing her email every 30 seconds. The girls disappeared into the back room, leaving the adults to their anxious vigil. I keep thinking about what I'll say to Sophia if we lose, Lena confessed, wiping down already clean counters for the third time. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes bad people win because they have more money and better lawyers? The same way you explain that her father chose to leave rather than be a parent. You tell her the truth, and you show her that loss doesn't mean surrender. Caleb caught her hand, stilling the compulsive cleaning. But we're not going to lose. You can't know that. No, but I can believe it. Evidence matters. Truth matters. Morrison wouldn't have spent 4 hours in that hearing if he planned to rubber stamp Sterling's claims. At 4:47 p.m., Marcus Webb's name lit up both their phones simultaneously. Caleb answered on speaker, heart pounding. The ruling just came through, Webb said, and his tone carried something Caleb couldn't immediately identify. Morrison denied Sterling's emergency eviction petition in its entirety. Lena's knees actually buckled. Caleb caught her, one arm around her waist, while his own relief threatened to overwhelm his ability to stand. He denied it? Completely. Read his opinion yourself. I'm sending it now. But the highlights are devastating for Sterling. Morrison found that their safety claims were fabricated, their structural engineer's testimony was not credible, and the evidence of fraud was sufficiently compelling to warrant further investigation. He's ordered Sterling to withdraw all eviction proceedings, honor the existing lease terms, and submit to discovery regarding their property acquisition practices. Discovery? Caleb's forensic accountant brain immediately understood the implications. That means Sterling has to turn over internal documents and communications. Everything related to this property and their other recent acquisitions. Morrison specifically cited the pattern evidence you presented as justification for broader inquiry into potential fraud. Webb's satisfaction was audible through the phone. Sterling Development just got handed their worst nightmare, a judicial order to expose their entire operation to scrutiny. Lena was crying, silent tears streaming down her face while she gripped Caleb's hand like a lifeline. He pulled her closer, his own eyes burning with emotion he usually kept controlled. What happens next? He managed to ask. I'm drafting a formal settlement proposal. Sterling can either agree to a 5-year lease extension at current rates with guaranteed renewal options, or we proceed with the discovery process and likely civil fraud charges. My guess is they'll settle within 48 hours rather than risk what we'll find in their internal communications. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. Thank Jennifer Chen for the referral, and thank yourself for assembling evidence so comprehensive that even a conservative judge couldn't ignore it. You won this, Caleb. Both of you did. After hanging up, Caleb and Lena stood together in the cafe's afternoon quiet, holding each other while the magnitude of what had just happened settled over them. The girls must have sensed something because they emerged from the back room, Sophia's eyes wide and hopeful. Mama, what happened? Lena knelt down, pulling her daughter into a fierce hug. We won, baby. We get to keep our cafe. We get to stay. Sophia's whoop of joy brought Emma running, and suddenly all four of them were tangled together in celebration, the girls bouncing with excitement while the adults tried to process relief and victory and the stunning reality that fighting back had actually worked. Can we tell everyone? Emma asked. Can we have a party? Can we? Yes to all of it, Lena said, laughing through tears. Whatever you want. Today we celebrate. The celebration started small. Just the four of them, ordering pizza and making too much noise in the cafe after closing. But word spread fast in the waterfront community, and soon regular customers were appearing at the door with champagne and congratulations, wanting to share in the victory of the small business that had refused to surrender. By 8 p.m., Morales Roasters was packed with neighbors and customers and supporters who'd been following the battle, all of them raising glasses to the stubborn cafe owner and her forensic accountant ally who'd taken on corporate power and won. Speech, someone called out, and the crowd took up the chant, Speech! Speech! Lena looked genuinely panicked, but Caleb gave her a gentle push forward. She climbed onto a chair with Emma steadying her, facing the packed cafe with visible emotion. I don't know what to say, she began, her voice shaky. 3 weeks ago, I thought I was going to lose everything I'd built. This cafe, 8 years of work, the space where my daughter grew up. Sterling Development assumed I'd fold because I was alone and outmatched. They were wrong on both counts. She looked directly at Caleb. I wasn't alone. I had friends who refused to let me face the fight by myself, who brought evidence and expertise and stubborn determination to protect something that mattered. And I learned that sometimes the right people show up exactly when you need them most. The crowd erupted in applause, and Lena climbed down from the chair straight into Caleb's arms. He held her while people cheered and music started playing, and the celebration shifted from relief into genuine joy. Thank you, Lena whispered against his shoulder. For all of it, for believing this was worth fighting for. Always, Caleb replied, and meant it with everything he had. The party continued late into the evening, but eventually the crowd thinned and the cafe emptied until it was just the four of them again. Two single parents and their daughters, cleaning up champagne glasses and pizza boxes while exhaustion and happiness competed for dominance. Can Sophia sleep over? Emma asked, the question becoming routine. Please, we want to celebrate together. Caleb looked at Lena questioningly. She nodded, too drained to drive home anyway, and the girls disappeared upstairs to construct what would undoubtedly be an elaborate blanket fort. Alone in the cafe's quiet aftermath, Caleb and Lena sank into chairs at the corner table where he'd spent so many afternoons working while she roasted beans and built her business. The space felt different now, charged with victory and possibility, and the weight of everything that had changed in 3 weeks. Morrison's ruling came with an addendum, Lena said, pulling out her phone. Marcus sent it separately. Apparently the judge was so disturbed by the fraud evidence that he's referring the case to the State Attorney General for criminal investigation into Sterling Development's business practices. Kane's going to face actual criminal charges? Potentially. Marcus says the AG will review everything we presented, conduct their own investigation, and determine whether to prosecute. She scrolled through the message. He also mentioned that the other tenants Sterling forced out could use our case as basis for their own lawsuits to recover damages. Caleb felt satisfaction settle deep in his chest. This wasn't just about saving one cafe anymore. It was about exposing a pattern of corporate predation and potentially stopping Sterling from destroying other small businesses. That's what happens when bullies finally face consequences, he said. The whole structure starts crumbling. Do you think Kane will actually face jail time? Depends on what the AG finds, but even if he avoids criminal prosecution, the civil lawsuits will bankrupt Sterling Development. His business model only works when victims can't fight back. We proved that's not always true. They sat in comfortable silence, both processing the day's emotional whiplash. Victory felt surreal after weeks of preparation for potential loss, like reality hadn't quite caught up with Morrison's ruling. What happens now? Lena asked quietly. With us, I mean. The terrible timing that might be exactly right. Caleb considered the question carefully, aware that whatever answer he gave would set the tone for everything that followed. I think we take it slow. Figure out what we're building without the pressure of crisis driving us together. See if what we feel in normal life is as strong as what we felt fighting Sterling. That sounds reasonable and mature. But I've spent 6 years being reasonable and mature and carefully protecting myself from emotional risk. It's exhausting, Caleb, and I'm tired of being afraid that letting someone in means they'll eventually leave. I'm not leaving. That's not who I am. I know. I've watched you be a father, be a friend, be someone who shows up when it matters. That's why this terrifies me so much. Because I actually believe you, and believing means being vulnerable again. Caleb reached across the table, taking both her hands in his. Then we're both terrified together, because I'm just as scared that I'll screw this up, hurt you accidentally, damage the friendship we've built. But I'd rather risk that than pretend we're still just friends when we both know it's more. So we take it slow but honest. Figure it out as we go. Yeah, that works. Lena smiled, and Caleb saw in her expression the same cautious hope he felt building in his own chest. They'd won the battle against Sterling Development. Maybe they could figure out this next challenge too. The weekend passed in a blur of celebration and exhausted recovery. Marcus Webb called Saturday afternoon with the news they'd been expecting. Sterling Development had agreed to settle rather than face discovery. The terms were everything they'd demanded: 5-year lease extension at current rent, guaranteed renewal options, and a formal acknowledgement that all eviction proceedings had been based on erroneous information. They're also paying your legal costs, Webb added with satisfaction. Every penny, including my fees. Kane wanted to avoid that, but I made it clear the alternative was me spending months digging through every property acquisition they've made in the past 5 years. He folded in under an hour. How much damage did we actually do to Sterling? Caleb asked, curious about the broader impact. Significant. 3 former tenants have already contacted me about filing civil suits for wrongful eviction. The state AG's office is taking the criminal referral seriously. They've requested all our evidence files and scheduled preliminary interviews. And the local news picked up the story. Sterling Development's reputation is pretty much destroyed in Seattle's commercial real estate market. Good. Maybe it'll make other developers think twice before trying similar tactics. That's the hope. You two set a precedent. Small businesses can fight back successfully if they have good evidence and people willing to help them. Not a bad legacy for a cafe owner and a forensic accountant. The settlement documents arrived Monday morning, official and binding. Lena signed them in Caleb's home office with Emma and Sophia watching, the girls understanding this was important even if the legal language was beyond them. It's really over? Sophia asked as her mother set down the pen. It's really over. We get to keep our cafe for at least 5 more years, and Sterling Development can't bother us anymore. Lena pulled her daughter close. We won, baby. We actually won. Emma looked at Caleb with the kind of fierce pride that made his chest tight. You saved Lena's cafe, Dad. You're like a superhero, but with spreadsheets. Marcus Webb did most of the legal work, and your mom was incredibly brave testifying in court. I just analyzed documents. You did way more than that, Lena said quietly. You believed it was worth fighting for when I was ready to give up. That made all the difference. The girls wandered off to play, leaving the adults alone with signed settlement papers and the strange emptiness that followed intense crisis. For weeks, every moment had been consumed by preparation and strategy and evidence analysis. Now suddenly, there was just normal life, with all its mundane complexities and uncertain futures. I should get back to the cafe, Lena said, though she didn't move to leave. Been closed too much lately. Customers are probably wondering if I went out of business despite winning. Or you could take one more day. Let yourself actually process everything that happened. Caleb moved to stand beside her at the window overlooking his backyard. You've been in crisis mode for 3 weeks. It's okay to breathe. I don't remember how to not be in crisis mode. Single parent, small business owner, constantly one disaster away from losing everything. Crisis is my default setting. Mine too. Maybe we could learn together how to exist without constant emergency driving us forward. Lena turned to face him, and the vulnerability in her expression made Caleb's heart ache. I'm scared, Caleb. We won the battle with Sterling, but now we have to figure out this thing between us without crisis as an excuse. What if we're only good together when we're fighting common enemies? Then we'll find out and adjust accordingly, but I don't think that's what this is. He took her hand, the gesture becoming familiar. I think we've been building toward this for 5 years through hundreds of small moments that had nothing to do with crisis. Coffee conversations and school pickup coordination and kids' playdates. The foundation was already there. Sterling just made us acknowledge it. When did you become wise about relationships? Forensic accountants are supposed to be emotionally stunted. I have excellent teachers. Emma forces me to be honest, and you won't let me hide behind professional detachment. Between the two of you, I'm learning. She kissed him then, soft and questioning, and Caleb responded with the kind of careful attention that suggested they had time now. No rush, no crisis deadline, just two people figuring out how to build something real from the friendship they'd already established. When they separated, Lena was smiling. Okay, we take it slow but honest. See where this goes without pressure or expectations. That's the plan. Plans are good. Accountants like plans. This accountant likes you. That's better than any plan. The girls reappeared demanding lunch, and the moment shifted back into the comfortable chaos of blended families learning to exist together. They made sandwiches and argued about movie choices and eventually ended up in Caleb's backyard with Emma teaching Sophia some soccer drills she'd learned at practice. Watching them, Caleb felt something settle that had been unsettled since Vanessa left. Maybe longer. This felt right in a way his marriage never had. Messy and imperfect and utterly honest, built on mutual support rather than careful performance. What are you thinking? Lena asked, appearing beside him with 2 beers from his refrigerator. That my life looks nothing like what I planned, but it might actually be better this way. Better than the perfect suburban marriage and carefully maintained facade. So much better. Because this is real. Complicated and uncertain, but real. They stood together watching their daughters play. 2 single parents who'd survived abandonment and corporate threats, and their own fears about vulnerability. The future stretched ahead undefined and full of possibility, no longer constrained by what they'd thought their lives should look like. 2 weeks later, Morales Roasters reopened with a celebration that filled the cafe beyond capacity. Regular customers mixed with new faces who'd heard about the David versus Goliath battle and wanted to support the cafe that had refused to surrender. Lena moved through the crowd with Sophia at her side, accepting congratulations and sharing coffee samples and looking genuinely happy for the first time in months. Caleb stood back, watching her work the room with the easy confidence of someone who'd earned her victory. Emma appeared beside him, following his gaze with knowing eyes. You're staring at Lana again. I'm observing. Different thing entirely. You're staring and smiling like a dork. Sophia and I have a bet about when you'll officially become boyfriend-girlfriend. Caleb looked down at his daughter, simultaneously embarrassed and amused. You two are placing bets on my relationship status? Sophia says by the end of the month. I say sooner because you're already basically together, you just haven't made it official. Emma grinned. So? Who wins? How about I decide my relationship timeline without considering your gambling enterprises? That's a no-answer answer, which means Sophia's probably right about end of the month. Emma darted away before Caleb could respond, leaving him shaking his head at his daughter's perceptiveness. Lena caught his eye across the cafe and smiled, the kind of private communication that spoke volumes without words. Caleb raised his coffee cup in acknowledgement, and she returned the gesture with her own cup, a silent toast to survival and victory, and whatever came next. Later, after the crowd thinned and the girls were helping clean up, Marcus Webb appeared with a bottle of excellent champagne and news that the state attorney general was moving forward with criminal fraud charges against Victor Kane personally. They found enough evidence in Sterling's internal documents to support charges of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and racketeering. Kane's looking at significant prison time if convicted. Webb popped the champagne cork, pouring for everyone. The other displaced tenants are organizing a class action lawsuit for damages. Your case opened the floodgates. Good, Lena said firmly. People like Kane count on victims being too scared or too broke to fight back. About time someone proved that's not always true. They toasted to justice and stubborn determination and the power of good evidence properly presented. The celebration was quieter than the grand reopening, just the core group who'd fought the battle together, but it felt more meaningful for its intimacy. As the evening wound down, Caleb found himself alone with Lena in her office, the small, cluttered space that had become their war room during the crisis. Settlement papers sat filed in a drawer, evidence binders stored on a shelf, and the whole mess of the past month reduced to paperwork and memory. Hard to believe it's actually over, Lena said, looking around the office. For weeks this consumed everything. Now it's just another thing that happened. Not just another thing, you faced down a corporate developer and won. You proved that fighting back matters. That's significant. We proved it. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Caleb pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. Then we're a good team. In crisis, and hopefully in regular life, too. You think we can figure out regular life, after everything? I think we're stubborn enough to try. And we have two very invested children who will probably intervene if we screw it up too badly. Lena laughed against his chest, and Caleb felt the rightness of the moment settle over him. This wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was the one he'd built through crisis and choice, and the willingness to show up when it mattered. A month later, on a Saturday afternoon that felt like the first real day of fall, Caleb and Emma officially moved past the guest stage at Morales family dinners. Lena cooked actual dinner instead of ordering takeout. Sophia set the table with her good plates, and the four of them sat down together with the unspoken understanding that this was becoming their routine. "Dad's staring at Lena again," Emma announced to Sophia with exaggerated exasperation. "They're being weird and not official still." "Grown-ups are slow," Sophia agreed sagely. "My mom took like 3 weeks to admit she liked Mr. Turner, even though it was super obvious." "I'm right here," Lena protested. "And we're not being slow, we're being thoughtful." "You're being scared," Emma corrected with the brutal honesty of 9-year-olds. "Which is dumb because you're already together. You just won't say it." Caleb exchanged a glance with Lena across the table, seeing his own amusement reflected in her expression. Their daughters had a point, as uncomfortable as it was to admit. "Okay," he said, addressing Emma and Sophia directly. "You're right. We've been cautious about labeling something we're both still figuring out. But yeah, Lena and I are together. Officially." "Is that what you wanted to hear?" "Finally!" Sophia threw her hands up. "That took forever." "I won the bet," Emma crowed. "End of the month, exactly like I predicted." The girls high-fived while Lena buried her face in her hands, laughing helplessly. "We just got relationship managed by 8 and 9-year-olds. Seems appropriate given how much they've been managing our lives anyway." Caleb reached across the table, taking Lena's hand openly. "But they're right. We've been together in every way that matters for weeks now. Might as well acknowledge it. So this is official? Like, you're my boyfriend and I'm your girlfriend? Those words sound ridiculous at our age, but yes, that's what this is." Lena squeezed his hand, her smile radiant despite the absurdity of being forced into relationship definition by their children. "Okay then, official it is." The dinner continued with easy conversation and comfortable chaos, 4 people who'd survived individual crises and emerged as something like a family. It wasn't traditional, wasn't what any of them had planned, but it was real and honest, and built on the kind of foundation that lasted. Later, after the girls were asleep in Sophia's room and the adults were cleaning up together in Lena's kitchen, she turned to Caleb with sudden seriousness. 3 months ago, my biggest worry was whether to expand my coffee blend selection. Now I'm in a relationship with my best friend, recovering from nearly losing my business, and figuring out how to build a life that looks nothing like what I expected. She set down the dish she'd been washing. Is it weird that I'm happier now than I was when everything was stable and predictable? Not weird at all. Stable and predictable was also probably unfulfilling and slowly suffocating. Crisis forced us both to confront what wasn't working and build something better. Very philosophical for a forensic accountant. I contain multitudes. Caleb dried the last dish, then turned to face her fully. But yeah, I'm happier too. My marriage was dying slowly for years. I just wouldn't admit it. Vanessa leaving was actually a gift, even though it didn't feel like it at the time. Made space for something real. Think we can sustain something real without constant crisis keeping us together? Only one way to find out. They finished cleaning in comfortable silence, then settled on Lena's couch with coffee and the kind of easy proximity that suggested this was becoming their default setting. The future stretched ahead undefined but promising, built on friendship, and tested by fire and strong enough to withstand whatever came next. 6 months later, Morales Roasters celebrated its 9th anniversary with a neighborhood block party that spilled out onto Harbor Avenue. Victor Kane was facing trial on multiple fraud charges. Sterling Development had filed for bankruptcy, and 3 other displaced tenants had won settlements that more than compensated for their losses. The story had made local and national news. Small business owner defeats corporate developer with help from forensic accountant friend. The narrative was simplified and romanticized, but the core truth remained. Sometimes fighting back actually worked. Caleb stood at the edge of the celebration watching Lena work the crowd, exactly where she belonged. Emma and Sophia were running around with a pack of neighborhood kids. Their friendship deepened into something like sisterhood. His life looked nothing like the carefully controlled suburban existence he'd maintained with Vanessa, and he wouldn't change a single thing. "You did good, Turner," Marcus Webb said, appearing beside him with a beer. "Saved the cafe, exposed corporate fraud, got the girl. Not bad for an accountant." "The girl helped save herself. I just provided ammunition." "Modesty doesn't suit you. Take the win." Webb clinked his beer against Caleb's. "Though I hear the state's attorney's office has been calling you about consulting on other property fraud cases. Might be developing a new specialty." "Might be. Turns out I'm good at exposing developers who prey on small businesses. And motivated by protecting people you care about. Dangerous combination for corporate predators." Lena caught Caleb's eye across the crowd and gestured for him to join her. He excused himself from Webb and wove through the celebration to her side, where she was being interviewed by a local news crew about the anniversary and recovery. "This is Caleb Turner," Lena introduced him to the reporter. "The forensic accountant who helped me fight Sterling Development and win. I literally wouldn't be standing here celebrating 9 years without his expertise and support." The reporter asked the predictable questions about their relationship and how the crisis had brought them together. Caleb answered honestly. They'd been friends for years. The eviction battle had forced them to acknowledge deeper feelings, and they were building something real from the foundation of friendship and shared values. "Any advice for other small business owners facing similar situations?" the reporter asked. "Fight back," Lena said firmly. "Document everything. Find people who'll stand with you, and refuse to accept that corporate power automatically wins. It's hard and scary and uncertain, but sometimes it's worth it. And get yourself a good forensic accountant," Caleb added with a smile. "Evidence matters. Truth matters. Sometimes that's enough." The interview ended, and they were swept back into the celebration. Later, as the sun set over Elliott Bay and the party began winding down, the 4 of them, Caleb, Lena, Emma, and Sophia, sat together on the cafe's front steps, watching the neighborhood slowly quiet. "Best anniversary ever," Sophia declared, leaning against her mother. "Best year ever," Lena corrected, looking at Caleb with unmistakable love. "Even with the corporate fraud and eviction threats and legal battles. Best year because we fought for what mattered and won." "We won because you wouldn't quit," Caleb said. "Everything else was just details." Emma rolled her eyes at Sophia. "They're being mushy again." "Let them. They earned it," Sophia grinned. "Besides, it's kind of nice having them officially together. Makes everything less weird." "Was it weird before?" "Super weird. All the feelings, but pretending they were just friends. Way better now that they're honest." The adults listened to their daughter's analysis with amusement and recognition. Out of the mouths of children came uncomfortable truths about the games grown-ups played to avoid vulnerability. "You two are very wise," Lena told the girls seriously. "Thank you for managing our relationship when we were too scared to do it ourselves." "You're welcome," Emma said graciously. "Now can we have ice cream? Celebrating requires ice cream." They walked to the corner shop together, 4 people who'd become a family through crisis and choice and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The life they'd built looked nothing like traditional family structures, but it was real and honest and exactly what they all needed. That night, after ice cream and goodbyes and promises to see each other tomorrow, Caleb stood in his own house feeling the comfortable anticipation of a future being built one day at a time. Vanessa's departure had seemed catastrophic 3 months ago, but it had actually been liberation. Space for something better to grow. His phone buzzed with the text from Lena. "Thank you. For everything. For fighting for my cafe. For believing in us. For showing up when it mattered most. I love you." Caleb stared at the message, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. They hadn't said those words yet, carefully dancing around the declaration while building the relationship it described. But reading it now felt exactly right. He typed back, I love you too. Have for a while now. Glad we're both finally saying it. The response came immediately. Slow but honest, remember? We got there eventually. Yeah, we did. Caleb set down his phone and allowed himself to feel the full weight of what they'd built. From friendship forged through parallel struggles, through crisis that could have destroyed everything, to love that was real and honest and worth fighting for. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely right. Emma appeared in his doorway, supposedly in bed, but clearly still awake. Was that Lena texting you? How did you know? You get this dumb smile when it's her. It's pretty obvious. She padded into the room, climbing onto his lap despite being arguably too big for it. Are you happy, Dad? Really happy? Caleb wrapped his arms around his daughter, feeling the truth of the answer settle into his bones. Yeah, Em, I really am. Everything's different than I expected, but it's better. Does that make sense? Complete sense. I like our life now. I like that Lena and Sophia are part of it. I like that you smile real smiles instead of fake ones. She hugged him tight. I'm happy too. Good. That's all that matters. They sat together in the quiet house, father and daughter processing the past few months and the future stretching ahead. Outside, Seattle continued its evening rhythms. Inside, Caleb Turner, forensic accountant, single father, defender of small businesses, and man unexpectedly in love, felt something like peace. The cafe would open tomorrow, same as always. Cases would demand his attention at Morrison and Webb. Emma and Sophia would need rides to school and soccer practice. Life would continue with all its mundane complications and small joys. But underlying everything was the knowledge that showing up mattered, that fighting back sometimes worked, that the right people appearing at exactly the right time could change everything. Vanessa had left him standing in a driveway, expecting devastation. Instead, Lena had stood beside him, offering presence and possibility. 3 months later, they'd built something worth protecting, worth celebrating, worth believing in. Sometimes that was all anyone needed, someone willing to stay when leaving would be easier, someone who showed up when it mattered most, someone who proved that real love was simply keeping your promises even when things got hard. Caleb had found that. Against all odds and terrible timing and corporate villains trying to destroy what mattered, he'd found it, fought for it, and won. And that made all the difference.